I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
President Bush standing on top of the World Trade Center rubble. That was then. The retired firefighter he had his arm wrapped closely around is with us now. Bob Beckwith, good to see you.
Good to see you, Neil.
That is such a memorable, historic shot. You're going to be in history books for decades, for centuries.
Wow.
How did that shot happen?
I didn't even know that there was cameras down there. I didn't see any cameras down there. I really didn't. And I was up on the truck. That was a fire engine we were standing on, and I was just standing there. There was nobody around me. So this Karl Rove came over, and he dusted off next to my foot, and he said, "Is this safe?" And I said, "Yeah." I didn't know it was Karl Rove. and he said, "Okay." He said, "Prove it. Jump up and down on it." So I jumped up and down on it. It was safe. He said, "Okay." Then he's yelling up at me, somebody's coming over here, and when they come over, you help them up, and then you come down. I said, "Okay." I didn't know who was coming over there because right across the street was the command post with the tent and the microphones. And I said, "Wow, what a nice spot." So I figured, the politician's coming over there to stand next to me. We can watch the president talk. Anyway, he came. We waited about 5-6 minutes, and he comes around. I figure he's going to the microphones. He cuts right in front of me, and he puts his arm up. I said, "Oh, my God."
Then you were trapped. You couldn't go anywhere.
Oh, man. No, I helped him up. I said, "You okay, Mr. President?" I turned him around. He said, "Yes." So I start to get down. He says, "Where are you going?" I said, "I was told to get down." He said.
And the rest, as they say, is history. It's interesting, Bob. You weren't even supposed to be there that day. You were retired.
Yes.
You heard about what happened. Yes. You volunteered to come in.
Yes.
And even a lot of people at Ground Zero at the time, they didn't want you to come in, but you forced your way in.
I got down there, because, a buddy of mine, Jimmy Boyle, his son was missing, and when I got the word on that, he was the president of the UFA, and I was one of his delegates. I was a delegate. And I figured I got to get down there, so I didn't listen to my children. They told me, "You're too old to go down there." I was 69 years old, so I said, "I'm going down." And I came down that morning bright and early, and I had trouble getting in because the perimeter was all police officers, but I got through them.
You bamboozled them,
then I got through. I had to get through the National Guard. That was tough.
But you got there.
I got in.
But you've also since made a cause of helping out those, particularly burn victims who were hit hard, and some of whom were not compensated. That is still your cause 5 years later.
Yes, it is. Yes, the Burn Center Foundation, New York Firefighters Burn Center Foundation. If, God forbid, anybody gets burned, it's not only for firemen, it's for everybody. And we have the burn camp for the kids. They really do a lot. They have the best equipment, the best doctors, the best nurses. We really do. Up here at 68th in New York Presbyterian.
Well, you've done a lot of good, but I'm always curious, and I've talked to a lot of heroes like yourself right afterwards.
I'm not a
and
hero.
you always say that. I know you do.
Those guys are in there.
Well, you
heroes.
say that, but you risked a lot coming in.
And the cops and the firemen and the iron workers and the Port Authority guys, they're the heroes.
Let me ask
they
you,
stayed down there for months.
When did it dawn on you that there weren't going to be that many to rescue?
When Mayor Giuliani said, "That's it, guys, no more." But I couldn't believe that he cut that so soon. I've heard of people living a whole week under the ground.
So you think we potentially could have found more victims?
That's what in my mind.
Yeah.
That's what I really believed.
Have you seen?
But he was right. I guess.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Have you seen, Bob, any of the movies on 9/11, like World Trade Center?
I saw World Trade Center, and I met a fellow this morning that was the Marine who went in. Did you see it?
Yeah, I did.
And the Marine that went in and got those guys.
You met that guy?
I met that guy this morning.
He was a character.
Yeah.
Bob, I want to thank you. I know your family's in here, 6 kids, 10 grandkids. You dropped everything to come in and help people out. You say you're not a hero, Bob, but I disagree. How's that? Can I politely disagree?
Yeah.
Very good seeing you.
Thank you, Neil.
Bob Beckwith with us, and that was a a memorable time for a lot of folks. He risked a lot to be here. Meanwhile, Americans who did lose loved ones in these attacks could have retreated and just slipped away. Thankfully, many did not, including my next guest. Now, he lost his father, Ronald, in the attacks and is using something that his dad did in his final moments to make a difference in so many lives. With us now to explain is Rob Fazio. Rob, what was that?
My dad was last seen literally holding the door and leading the charge to get people out so they could return to their loved ones. And that's what we used as inspiration to help people with our nonprofit.
All right, so he risked a lot. He could have escaped and gotten out alive, but he was holding the door for others to get out. How many do you suspect he saved?
I don't know how many, Neil, but I know that countless people called our house asking for my dad, saying, where is he? And we just heard that he was holding the door, getting people out, and he knew that he needed to get home to his family, wanted other people to do that, and that's been inspiring so we could help people actually use this tragedy as a way to grow.
All right, Rob, I also have someone in here who has done a lot of good since this tragic day. With us now is Anthony Gardner. Now, Anthony lost his brother Harvey in the attacks on the World Trade Center. Anthony is also making a difference through something called his United Family Group Foundation. How does that work?
Hi, Neil. Right now we're working with professors from Queens College to create a high school 9/11 curriculum, which is based on Holocaust studies, to really engage the youth, use these firsthand stories and engage them and direct them towards civic participation, to really learn and draw inspiration from some of the examples of not only the stories of hope and survival from 9/11 and the stories of our loved ones, but also the stories of people who turned to advocacy to honor that loss and protect our heritage.
Where was Harvey when the attack happened?
Harvey was on the 83rd floor of Tower 1. He worked at General Telecom, and he was trapped with his 12 coworkers, and none of them survived. And
had any of them called, or had he called anyone in your family or you?
My brother Mark got through to him shortly after 9, and he heard Harvey said, "I need to put the phone down." And in the background, he heard Harvey comforting people. He said he heard him say, "Don't worry, we're going to survive." And that's who my big brother was. He was brave. He was my role model and teacher, and I'm inspired by the life that he lived, and he still inspires me in the way that he died and his connection to American history.
You know, I know for both of you, and Rob, for you as well, it's hard to make something good out of something so tragic. But what goes through your mind at the risk of sounding trite on a day like this, 5 years after the fact?
It's not what goes through my mind, Neil, it's what goes through my heart. There's such an absolute connection between the people down at Ground Zero, and the absolute feeling I get is that some of that horror is being replaced with resilience, and now it's our turn to look outward and to help other people that are affected by different types of crises.
You know, Anthony, everyone says that, you know, it's good that we have these anniversaries in a way to remind us, to remind what happened to your brother, remind what happened to Rob's dad, but that we do forget. And that as time goes on, you know, 2 of my kids were born after 9/11. Yes. And I wonder if we do start forgetting. Do you worry?
I worry that if this memorial isn't done right, it's going to help that trend. There was a poll in the Washington Post last month that found that 30% of Americans couldn't identify the year in which September 11th occurred, and we're only 5 years out. So we really need to educate our youth, inspire them towards civic participation, and educate our fellow citizens on the ongoing issues that are still plaguing this site. We still need resolution on the memorial, how the names will be displayed. WTC Families for Proper Burial continues to battle with Mayor Michael Bloomberg, New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg, to get the ash and remains of the victims out of the Fresh Kills garbage dump. These are ongoing issues, and these are
still unresolved.
Still unresolved,
right.
and we're not obstructionists. Okay. We want to work with our leaders, right. New York Governor George Pataki and Mayor Michael Bloomberg, and really move forward as we honor our victims.
Anthony,
our
thank you very much, and
thank you.
Good luck with all the good work you've been doing, as well as to you, Rob. Thank you both very, very much.
Thank you.
Well, after this, should 9/11 and the war on terror be a political football? Ed Koch certainly doesn't think so. He is here, and he is next. Welcome back to this very special edition of Your World Today. We are live from Ground Zero. After the 9/11 attacks, there were no Republicans, there were no Democrats, there were no independents. Everybody, just Americans, standing hand in hand on the steps of the Capitol. Remember that one? United against a common enemy. Today, of course, a very different story, a very different world in Washington. Reaction now from former New York City Mayor and Democrat Ed Koch. Of course, as I indicated, they're a lifelong Democrat who has never stopped supporting President Bush in this war against terrorists, much to the consternation of many in his party. But Mayor, you argue this is about security and about doing the right thing, not about politics. What do you mean?
This is a war of civilizations that is taking place, and President Bush has the guts, the courage, the intelligence to stand up to it like no other on the political scene. And I'm proud of him and how he has protected the country from a second incident, although it could happen. We're in for the long haul. That means years. This will not be over tomorrow. These people want to kill us. The number one guy who we killed, Zawahiri in Iraq, who killed him with a bomb, a 500-pound bomb, said, our religion requires that we kill the infidel, that we slaughter the infidel, unless he converts or pays tribute. And in fact, that's exactly what they're doing, not only to Christians and Jews and Hindus, but to other Muslims who disagree with them. Now,
but there are many who disagree with the president's approach in this country. And in fact, if the Democrats take control of Congress, Congressman Conyers has indicated he'd like to get impeachment hearings rolling.
Well, I think that Conyers ought to be impeached myself, because firstly, he denies that, and secondly, it's clear from his language that's what he intends. But the other Democrats, like Nancy Pelosi, runs away from it and has said, oh, no, 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 no. I personally believe that the Republicans will not lose control of either houses of Congress.
But if they do,
tomorrow.
let's say if they were to lose the House, there would be an effort to really go after this president and the spending on terror, the spending on the war.
It's a small number of crazies, like Conyers, a relatively small number, maybe 36 or so. And I believe that would be defeated. The vast majority of Republicans and Democrats understand that the very security of the country is at stake every single day, and that we ought to be working together as opposed to trying to make political hay.
But Mayor, they do make political hay.
They do.
But even for Americans, 5 years after these towers went down behind me, Mayor, when terror is raised as an issue, it falls to fourth or fifth now. In other words, as the time goes by, and because we haven't been hit, again, on U.S. soil in that time, we forget. What do you think of that?
Well, I'm afraid of whether or not we will have the endurance to continue over the years. The fanatics on the fundamentalist Islamic fascist side, they have the endurance because they want to die. Their religion, they say, is best served when they become martyrs, killing an infidel that's you or me or someone like us, and then they're lifted to heaven, given 72 virgins. That's their statement, not mine. I would think it's hard to find all those virgins.
That's enough. All right. But Mayor, your point is, you might not agree with this president on domestic issues, on other issues. But
I don't
when
agree
it
with
comes
him on
to terror,
a single issue.
I know you don't.
Right.
But on terror, stick
He's
by him.
number one.
All right. Mayor Ed Koch, thank you very much. Good
Thank
seeing you
you.
again. Well, he loses his son. He loses a third of his company, and yet he still finds the strength to smile, to do more with his life than ever before. I want you to meet a fellow named John Duffy, an inspiration to Wall Street, a hero to Main Street. After this. 5 years ago today, of course, the markets could never open. 5 years after, the Dow finishing the day up about 5 points. The NASDAQ was up about 7 and change, and the S&P 500 was up just a fraction. Well, he lost 67 workers at his firm on 9/11, 67 of them, including, get this, his own 23-year-old son. But instead of giving up, he built his business back up. Earlier, I spoke with John Duffy, the chairman and the CEO of investment bank Keefe, Bruyette & Woods. I asked him, first off, how his day and this day affects him and his family.
You relive the horror of that day. I haven't gone to any of the movies that have been released lately. I'm not sure I ever will. I don't think I need to. Live the experience, you know, too close. So I don't need to relive it. But yeah, as we come up on the anniversary each year, there are constant reminders. But in a certain aspect, I don't mind that in that because I think it's important for us to remember what happened that day, and it's especially important for us at the firm that people not forget the 67 people that we lost and the 3,000 people that were murdered that day.
A lot of people who are not familiar with your story, John, did you hear from your son Christopher earlier that day, or did he call or communicate with your family that day?
I called the office after I heard the news report of the plane hitting the first tower, and I wound up talking to one of my assistants. I didn't talk to Christopher. The first plane hit the north tower. Our folks were obviously in the south tower, so we had no idea about what was going to happen 16 or 17 minutes later. I didn't feel the urgency to call him. I tried to call him after the second plane hit. Was unable to get through. He did talk with his younger brother Kevin, who was a student up at St. Michael's in Vermont, and they were able to establish contact with each other. So Kevin's actually the last one who talked to Christopher, and the conversation took place shortly after the second plane had hit the south tower.
Can you share what he said?
Well, he said it was, you know, terribly frightening. They were trying to get out. Kevin speculated that they were actually in a stairwell at that point in time, trying to find a way out of the building, and they eventually, you know, he stayed on the phone, but they eventually lost contact.
You could have left it all. You could have retreated to any one of maybe a number of vacation homes, and rightly so. And you could have wallowed in self-pity. Again, rightly so. You didn't. Why not?
I don't think that would have been the right thing to do. I don't think I would have felt good about doing that. I think we felt an obligation of sorts to the families who lost their breadwinner that morning.
You lost your son. I mean, that's tough enough. I know you're trying to think of other people, but you're feeling their pain. You have it in bucket loads.
Well, yes. I mean, I did not come back to work for a little bit more than 2 weeks. Andy Senchak and Tom Michaud ran the firm in that period of time. I initially started to put it back together. I didn't go back to work until I felt mentally I was ready to do that. I was dealing with my own personal loss and grief for the first couple of weeks. After we had a memorial service for Chris the second Saturday after 9/11, I kind of felt that there had been a little bit of closure, and that I needed to do something a little bit more positive than wallow in self-pity.
It was no accident that Wall Street was targeted by the terrorists 5 years ago. You think it could happen again?
Absolutely.
Boy, you didn't give that a moment of equivocation.
I think we'd be fools to think it can't happen again. We probably thought it couldn't happen 5 years ago, but we learned we were wrong. And I think to take any false sense of security in that we're better off today, I think is a mistake.
For you, looking back 5 years, what's the one thing you've learned?
Don't procrastinate. You don't know how much time you have personally. You don't know how much time you have, kind of business aspect. I think when you're faced with an opportunity or a challenge or a problem, you better resolve it today or as quickly as you can, because you may not be here tomorrow.
Someone told me, like, you're into all sorts of weird stuff now. You're financing a Canadian rock band. You are practicing what you preach, I guess, but some people think you're going kind of off your rocker. What's going on here?
I'm having some fun. I think it's part of maybe how my personality's changed a little bit, in that if there's something you think you might want to do because it's fun or rewarding or whatever the aspect, do it. And I've got into 3 ventures in the last year. 2 of them are in the kind of the restaurant business. One of them's back in a food chain, restaurant chain out in California. Another one's a more local cheesecake company. And then I found my way into backing a Canadian band, and it's a great story.
Christopher would like, I think, the rock.
Christopher would love it. In fact, when we released the CD, we're going to call it Duff Jam Productions, and Christopher was known for throwing parties that were known as Duff Jams.
Right.
So we've got a song coming out. It was inspired by my book, Triumph Over Tragedy, and listening to the CD now, I'm inspired every morning. I throw it in the CD player in the car and I listen to it, and it inspires me. So inspiration works in different ways.
John Duffy. They were the forgotten heroes of 9/11, workers who became very sick after their heroic work at Ground Zero. They were highlighted on this show until a change was made. We're going to speak to one of those workers and the governor who made that change after this. Their names were not read aloud at Ground Zero today, not a one, but maybe they should have been. We call them, of course, the forgotten heroes, and we've highlighted many of their stories for months on this very show. Rescue workers who put their lives on the line that day, and in some cases are now paying with their lives. Well, New York Governor George Pataki only recently signed legislation offering financial help to injured rescue workers. He joins us right now, along with volunteer firefighter Vinny Forrest, who now has a serious lung ailment due to his work at Ground Zero. Welcome to both of you. Governor, to you first. How many hundreds, if not thousands, do you think were hurt or whose health was compromised because of what happened here?
I can't put a number on it, but it's ultimately, I believe, going to be a tragically high percentage of those who spent hundreds of hours right at Ground Zero in the aftermath of those attacks. And to me, it's essential that we stand with them, because the firefighters, the EMTs, the police officers, the construction workers, the volunteers, they were the ones who brought us back, who held us together, who inspired America. And now it's our turn to be there for them. They were there when we needed them. And as long as I'm governor, we're going to be there for them.
Vinny, how do you feel about the fact you're now going to get not only recognition but help, when last time you appeared on my show, that didn't look likely?
God bless the governor first for what he's doing. And Neil, it's great to be back again with you.
Same here.
Governor, I thank you so much for what you're doing for the majority of the workers who are at Ground Zero. I just ask you to check into the area, which is a very gray area, called the Volunteer Firefighter Act. I just went to a workers' comp hearing just last week, and what they do is they're trying to challenge every step of the way our surgeries, our treatment. They want to question that we're really sick, and I know this is beyond probably what you're seeing, but the people at workers' comp are still giving the volunteer firefighters, the volunteer rescuers, a very hard time. And if you can use a barometer of if you qualified for Social Security disability, and you were at Ground Zero, that you should not be questioned and sent to IMEs and constantly have to prove that you're ill. And I think this is an area.
That was the issue, right, Vinny? And Governor, maybe you can pick up with me on this, because the suspicion was that even if you're right and that you can prove that volunteer firefighters were directly affected by what they picked up here, you're talking a lot of money, and that it could run into the thousands of victims, if not the tens of thousands of victims,
Neil,
and then no one has the money for that.
Neil, I don't think that's the case. We may be talking in absolute dollars lots of money, but when you think of what those responders, those heroes did in the weeks and months after September 11th. First of all, they brought us through the personal tragedy and the emotional loss, and then they allowed this great city and this great country to come back so strong economically. And you cannot put a price tag on their heroism.
Why did it take so many years to do what you did?
We wanted to have studies. We wanted to have the proof. And thank you for what you are doing by bringing cases to the public's viewpoint. And Vinny, I just want to say one thing to you. Volunteers are clearly covered by this legislation. nation, and it's important that all those in government understand that. You know, my father was a volunteer firefighter, and I keep a picture in my governor's office of this building bursting in flames, flames coming through the open roof, and there's this fireman on the end of the ladder, maybe 3 feet from the flames. It's my father. So we're not going to forget you guys, and we're going to be there. And believe me, I hear your message about the Workers' Comp Board, and they're going to hear from me.
I hope they do, sir. The one thing, sir, just for a second, if you're considered 99.9% disabled, which is Dr. Levin's statement to the Workers' Comp Board, as a volunteer firefighter, you go from full coverage of $400 a week down to $230 a week. That's one of those areas that I'm just hoping and praying that you're going to be able to shake these people up, because they're still towing the line the other way, and I have full faith and trust in you.
Well, Vinny, I know that the governor is on top of this, but I do want to ask you this, Vinny, because I remember when it looked like you were not going to get compensated, the governor was not going to do this. Of course, he did, over a lot of people objecting what he was doing. You said you'd do it all over again, even with all the hell you had to deal with. You would do it all over again. Really?
I would, absolutely, and the governor, coming from a family of volunteer firefighters, knows exactly what that means.
Absolutely.
Neil, since we spoke last, my son has returned from Iraq safely. He is now my official hero, and I would do it again because of what our brave soldiers are doing overseas now. We started the battle, as the governor pointed out, and we continue to fight this, and so do our brave soldiers.
All right, Vinny, I want to thank you, and of course the governor, for all you have done.
Thank you, thank you, Neil.
Very
and
much.
you know, listening to Vinny.
We had more time. We're going to come back right after this. More from Ground Zero after this. Someday there will be a building behind me here, and not just a vast pit here. Someday, I am told, there will be a park and a memorial, but more likely it'll be all about commerce and business, about people moving on and not looking back. I like how we Americans can do that. I just hope we don't forget this. What is behind me isn't just a death scene, it's a crime scene. People were murdered here. Families were blown apart here. But it was perpetrated here and at the Pentagon and in a field in Pennsylvania. Multiple murder scenes, scenes that shouldn't only be memorials to lives lost, but reminders to lives that still could be lost if we forget, if we gloss over the ugly, if we fail to show the planes hitting those towers, the people jumping from those towers, and the brave rescue workers doomed in those towers. The images are raw and ugly and frightening, and save a quick glance on a round number anniversary, they are few, if any. We can't stand to look. I say we can't stand not to. Those who wished us ill then hope we are getting forgetful now of the brutality committed here and the crime scene that is still very much here, because long before Iraq and Afghanistan and weapons of mass destruction, they plotted our destruction and our murder. They killed people here, so let us not sanitize what happened here. We owe it not only to the dead, we owe it more to all of those who still live. Good night.
Hi, everybody. I'm John Gibson. On this solemn day in American history, The Big Story pays tribute to the thousands of victims of 9/11 and all of their loved ones. It has been 5 years since the terrorists turned our airplanes into missiles and changed our world as we knew it. We're a different America now, a nation on alert, a nation at war with Islamic extremists and their ideology. There hasn't been another strike on our soil since, but it's not because the terrorists haven't tried. Today, America looks back and looks ahead, and so does President Bush. He'll address the nation tonight after visiting all 3 attack sites earlier. We're going to talk to some former and current members of the Bush administration about the day that changed America throughout this hour. Karen Hughes, Ari Fleischer, and Andy Card are all with us. But our special coverage begins now with Fox's Eric Shawn live at Ground Zero. Eric?
John, they came here today yet again to honor, to remember, to mourn. It has been 5 years, but it also seems so vivid, almost as if it did happen just this morning. Let's take a look live at the pit of Ground Zero. You're looking at the reflected pools. There are two each symbols representing the two footprints of World Trade Center Tower 1 and World Trade Center Tower 2. They are overflowing with flowers, with roses, mementos, and messages, all brought there in remembrance by family members of those who were killed. The devastating toll, name by name, addressed. A mournful roll call read by 230 of the relatives today. The total number here, 2,749 people who perished.
Michael George Arjinsky.
Louis Arena.
Barbara Jean Arostagui.
Adam P. Arias.
Michael Armstrong.
They had earlier descended into the pit, led by the New York City Fire Department bagpipe corps. It was a sorrowful procession of family members who came down to remember their loved ones. There were words of comfort and support on this day of tributes and tears. They clutched photographs, cards, mementos. Children had their photographs of their relatives pinned on their chests. They wore hats of their deceased firefighter fathers, the widows also remembering those who had lost. This, for the families, indeed, sacred ground. Among those who spoke and gave a message of optimism, New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani.
5 years from the date of the attack that changed our world, we've come back to remember the valor of those we've lost. Those who innocently went to work that day, and the brave souls who went in after them. We have also come to be ever mindful of the courage of those who grieve, and the light that still shines in their hearts.
Well, President Bush laid a wreath here yesterday. He also visited a local firefighters department right next to Ground Zero before he went to Shanksville, Pennsylvania. And about 2 hours from now, again, there will be the tribute in light. That are the twin beams that pierce the heavens, the twin lights evoking the lost World Trade Center tower that are lit all through the evening until dawn tomorrow. Again, John, a day of remembrance and honor as we also remember the threat that still exists. Back to you in the studio.
Eric Shawn at Ground Zero. Eric, thanks. The president also participating in a wreath-laying ceremony at the Pentagon, honoring the 184 people killed there on 9/11. Earlier, a crowd gathered for a somber remembrance, which included speeches from both Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld and Vice President Dick Cheney. Fox's Megan Kendall live at the Pentagon now. Hi, Megan.
Hi there, John. Yeah, it was the third of 3 such ceremonies today. At this one, the president visited the Pentagon, remembering the victims who died 5 years ago today. He and the First Lady laid a wreath in remembrance of the 184 victims here. Along the rope line afterward, the president showing some real emotion, wiping away a tear at one point, hugging and kissing many of the victims' friends and their family members. Now, the ceremony took place in front of the crash site on 9/11. That's the wall right behind me, John. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld spoke briefly, saying that despite the carnage on that infamous day, the terrorist mission is not succeeding.
Americans are not an intimidated people. Americans have not stopped flying on airplanes. We can see that this morning. And Americans have not stopped working in skyscrapers or here at the Pentagon.
Just before dawn, the Pentagon had a light ceremony to commemorate the victims, 184 beams of light illuminating the sky. Later, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs called this a day of remembrance and of recommitment, promising that the military is prepared to protect this nation.
We have one very simple message for terrorists. Those who would seek to prevent this kind of a gathering, those who seek to change our way of life. And that simple message is this: not on our watch.
And the Pentagon sustained massive damage on 9/11. Vice President Cheney said those inside immediately switched to war footing and the nation came together. And John, those beams of light that were illuminated this morning will go back on momentarily. They will remain on all night until 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. John.
Megan Kendall, the Pentagon. Megan, thanks. The world changed for all Americans 5 years ago. We learned who our enemy is, an enemy that taunts us even as we remember this national tragedy today. In a video release today, Al-Qaeda's #2 terror leader, Ayman al-Zawahiri, is calling on Muslims to step up resistance against the U.S., and he warns that Persian Gulf countries and Israel would be Al-Qaeda's next target. How are we tackling such threats? With me now live is Karen Hughes, State Department Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs. Karen, thanks for joining us. I know you're out fighting this, what amounts to a battle for the hearts and minds. Does Zawahiri score one today with that tape?
Well, at the same time that he was issuing that tape, we have a team of Muslim American citizens in Kyrgyzstan going on to Pakistan today, speaking on behalf of America, talking about how Islam is a part of America, and we have 6 to 7 million American Muslims who live here and work and are equally Muslim and American, many of them from Islamic communities around the world. So I think it's one of the things I've worked very hard to do, John, is to empower our own citizens. We have this new citizens dialogue we've started to serve as a bridge to help us speak to the Islamic communities throughout the world.
Karen, how is that going? I mean, what we read is that more than ever, the Islamic nations of the world are inflamed against us.
Well, I think you see the protests, you see the extremes, and clearly this is a challenging time. On the other hand, I'm convinced, as I travel the world, I've been to 26 countries, traveled about 130,000 miles in my first year on this job, and the people I've met with most places the world over, whether they're Muslim, Christian, Jewish, we all want much of the same things. We want to live in peaceful communities. We want to live in security. We want a better life for our children. And so one of the things I think, John, that we have to do is cultivate a sense of moral outrage against the terrorists that we face and remind the world that these are extremists, essentially a cult, a perversion of Islam that threatens the mainstream world, people of all faiths in many nations. This morning here at the State Department, we had a very moving ceremony where the names of all the countries who lost citizens on September 11th were read out loud. More than 90 countries, people of every faith and no faith at all, who were the victims of that horrible attack. And I think one of the things we can do as we remember September 11th is take that opportunity to say that it's the civilized world against a group of people who would pervert Islam and are actually, my Muslim friends telling me, violating the teachings of Islam, because like Christianity and Judaism, Islam teaches that life is precious and that no one has the right to take innocent life, including their own.
Karen, I know you have a job now at the State Department, but you've always been very close to President Bush. Today, he attended 3 ceremonies. He didn't make any public statements at any of them, and he speaks tonight at 9 to the nation and the world. What should we expect to hear from him?
John, I expect you'll hear a very unifying speech, a speech that's very reflective, a speech of remembrance for what we have lost, the sacrifices of those who died that day, of the families of the rescue workers who lost their own lives in many cases trying to save them. And I think we'll also see a rededication, a call to rededicate ourselves to the fact that of what we're up against. And, you know, I found myself struck, John, a couple of weeks ago. It really hit me when the terror plot unfolded in London, and to think about the fact that these people were going to just blow airplanes out of the sky. I mean, airplanes full of young families and children and grandparents and people who'd saved for a year to be able to take a vacation, and it's just horrifying. And we've got to it's a horrifying thought, and these are people who really want to threaten our freedom, including our fundamental confidence that when we get on an airplane that we can expect to arrive safely at our destination. And so it's really a battle on behalf of the civilized world versus some uncivilized people who want to threaten our freedoms, and the President will call for us to rededicate ourselves to that
Karen
cause.
Hughes. Karen Hughes, State Department Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs. Karen, thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Coming up, he learned with a whisper America was under attack. The man who told President Bush a second plane had crashed into the Twin Towers, former Chief of Staff Andy Card, will join me next on The Big Story. Americans around the world are commemorating the 9/11 attacks, including our brave troops overseas. We'll talk about their efforts in the war on terror and the hunt for bin Laden with the top brass at U.S. Central Command. Plus, they rushed to Ground Zero to save lives. Now some of their own lives are in jeopardy 5 years later. The Big Story's Douglas Kennedy reports on the health problems live from Ground Zero. And make sure to catch President Bush's address to the nation tonight on the Fox News Channel, live, 9 p.m. Eastern. Fair and balanced analysis will follow. Our special edition of The Big Story will be right back.
The president addresses the nation. Sacrifice, courage, heroes. We remember Rudy Giuliani, Governor Pataki, and America's bravest. Join a special Hannity and Colmes.
Nearly all of us can remember where we were on 9/11 and how we learned that our nation was under attack. President Bush learned with a whisper from his former chief of staff. Andy Carr broke the news to him while the president was sitting with children at an elementary school in Sarasota, Florida. The former White House chief of staff is with us now. Mr. Card, welcome.
Thank you, John. I'm glad to be with you.
I think all of us, well, in whatever venue we've seen it, we've seen you coming up to the president and whispering to him, I think twice. So what exactly did you say?
I said a second plane hit the second tower. Those were two facts. And then I made an editorial comment. I said, America is under attack. I stood outside the classroom door and I had learned with the president that it looked like a small twin-engine prop plane had crashed into one of the towers at the World Trade Center. The president then went into the classroom and the thought was that that had been a horrible accident. When the door shut, I learned that it looked like it wasn't a small twin-engine plane. It looked like it was a commercial jetliner. And then, oh my gosh, another commercial jetliner hit the other tower. And I wrestled in my mind with what to tell the president. I knew that I did not want to have a conversation with him in front of those very young students. I did not want to introduce any fear in the classroom. So I stepped back from the president after I whispered in his ear those two facts and that one editorial comment. And I was mightily impressed with how the president responded. He did nothing to introduce fear to those students, and he certainly didn't give any satisfaction to the terrorists who were looking for fear to be in the president's face.
Mr. Card, as you know, the president has been under attack from liberal critics for sitting there for 7 minutes. What was his choice? What other option did he have?
Well, I think he made exactly the right choice. He could not, obviously, scare the kids in that classroom. They were very young elementary school students. There was a press corps watching every move that the president was making and every facial expression. And I think that he had to digest what I had told him, but he certainly didn't want to introduce fear on the behalf of the United States of America, because that would have satisfied the terrorist. I think he collected his thoughts. He allowed the program to continue with the school children as they were reading a book, and then he politely excused himself and went into the holding room, and it was then that I watched him carry the awesome burden that a president carries to keep an oath that calls for him to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, which is really to protect us.
Mr. Card, how have we changed the way we deal with terror threats?
Oh, we have definitely changed an awful lot in this country of how we deal with terrorist threats. America is safer today than it was on September 11th, 2001. We're still not as safe as we'd like to be, and we have to keep vigilant all the time. We have to be very diligent about how we protect ourselves, but we are much safer today than we were the day the terrorists attacked. And we've also learned that intelligence has to be better. We have to do a better job with human intelligence, people going out and working with these groups to try to uncover what they're doing. We have to do a better job with technical intelligence. We have to build a coalition of allies around the world that will help us to understand the nature of the enemy and to prevent the enemy from attacking. But this is an enemy unlike any that ever attacked America before. Every other time America has been involved in a war, we've been involved with a nation state. This is not a nation state. This is a collection of people who have a common misunderstanding of a very, very good religion. And they are trying to steal that religion, and they're trying to corrupt the rest of the world and introduce anarchy to the entire world. So this threat is real, and we must continue to fight it. And this will be a long war, as the president said that it would be. But it's very, very important that the world unite together to make sure that those who are looking to deny civilization a chance to have governments of and by the people are prevented from doing so.
former White House Chief of Staff Andy Card. Mr. Card, thanks very much. Appreciate you
Thank you,
coming in
John.
today. Next, he sent us some taunting videos ever since the attack. So 5 years later, how far are we in the hunt for the #1 terrorist, Osama bin Laden? Plus, so many powerful images are ingrained in our minds from that day. We'll talk with the former about how he remembers 9/11. You are watching The Big Story.
As President Bush has said, this nation has defeated tyrants and liberated death camps, raised the lamp of liberty to every captive land. We have no intention of ignoring or appeasing history's latest gang of fanatics trying to murder their way to power.
The United States has had many victories in the war on terror over the last 5 years. It removed the Taliban from Afghanistan, liberated the people of Iraq from a brutal dictator, but it still hasn't captured bin Laden. Are we looking hard enough? And how important is it to actually find him? Let's ask U.S. Army Brigadier General Mark Kimmett, Deputy Director for Strategy and Plans at U.S. Central Command, also a former Chief Military Spokesman for the Coalition Provisional Authority in Baghdad, where you would usually see him, but he is in the studio with me today. General, thanks. Bin Laden, how important is it to get him?
It really is important. He, like Zawahiri, is an iconic figure. He must be brought to justice, must be killed or captured. But at the same time, we've got to understand that the job is not over when he is captured. We not only have to take out the leadership, but we have to take out the entire organization and the ideology as well, because the ideology perpetuates whether he's alive or not.
What does it do? I mean, this Zawahiri tape comes in today, and once that's their way of commemorating 9/11. And he's promising, he says the days are pregnant with something that's going to happen. How much effect does it have out there in the world where we're competing for what people think of us, that he's actively able to make these threats?
Well, I think Karen Hughes said it quite well earlier, that in fact they are trying to get their message out. We are trying to get the region to understand what liberty, what democracy, what pluralism is all about. And it is a competition for values. It's a competition for ideas. It's a competition for the future. And it is as important for the region to understand that they have a choice. The choice is to turn the clock back 10 centuries, to live a Taliban-like experience, or a choice of individual rights, freedom, liberation for women, education for women. And that's what needs to be debated. That's what needs to be argued. And so when Zawahiri puts out his tapes, it may put people a little bit on ease. But at the end of the day, in the argument and in the challenge of ideas, I think it's our ideas are the ones that are going to win.
The American people, if we can believe the polling, now see the war in Iraq as separate from the war on terror. Is there a reasonableness in that opinion, that public opinion?
Well, it is our view that Iraq, in fact, is a battleground in the war on terrorism. Perhaps we're not making our case strong enough. Perhaps we're not making the argument strong enough. But it is clear for those who are fighting in Iraq today that they understand that the terrorists are trying to make that a battleground. They will try to achieve victory there and carry that victory on to other victories as well. So the troops that are over there, they understand it. It is a fight against an ideology. It's a fight against an insurgency. They're there to win it. They understand that it must be won there. It must be won in Afghanistan. Otherwise, this dark cloud of this Islamist ideology, one that tries to take a great religion and abuse it for their own power, has a chance of taking hold, and we can't let that happen.
We are depending on our all-volunteer military to fight this war. Are we asking them to do too much?
We are asking a lot of these soldiers, and they're delivering a lot. We're asking a lot of the families, and the families are coming through as well. But these troops are all volunteers. They know what they're getting into, and we should be proud that America still has young men and women that are willing to fight for a cause that they understand inherently and down deep in their hearts they know is right.
Brigadier General Mark Kimmett, Deputy Director for Strategy and Plans at CENTCOM. General, thanks for coming in. Good to see you today. Time now to head over to Paige Hopkins for the rest of today's headlines. Hello, Paige.
Hello, John. Hello, everybody. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas announcing his Fatah faction and the ruling Hamas party have agreed to form a coalition government. Many Palestinians hoping the deal will mean the international community will ease sanctions, which, of course, were put in place after Hamas took over. The agreement said to be based on a proposal that implies recognition of Israel. And British Prime Minister Tony Blair stopping in Beirut. There he met with the Prime Minister of Lebanon to discuss the situation in the Middle East. Blair's restating Britain's position that a lasting solution to the violence is better with a UN resolution and not a quick fix. And Saddam Hussein defiant at his genocide trial, the former Iraqi dictator saying fellow Iraqis should not suffer guilt that they killed Kurds. The former Iraqi leader has accused Kurds of siding with the enemy in the war against Iran. Well, today, a Kurdish-American woman testified about seeing people sick and dying during an attack by Saddam's forces. Forecasters now say Hurricane Florence moving northeast and away from Bermuda. That storm tearing off roofs, knocking out power to thousands there. So far, there are no reports of injuries. Forecasters say they expect Florence to continue away from the U.S. coast. And late today, the National Hurricane Center said Tropical Storm Gordon has formed in the open Atlantic. This is the 7th named storm of the hurricane season. And that's a look at some of the other stories making headlines at this hour. Now let's send you back to the big story with John Gibson.
Okay, Paige, thank you. Iran says it's ready to consider freezing its uranium enrichment program, at least temporarily. The head of the UN's nuclear watchdog organization says the country's cooperation is, quote, much overdue. The big story's Rudy Bakhtiar is live in Tehran, Iran, on the video phone. So tell us how this came about, Rudy.
Well, hello to you, John. It looks like the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency's head, that would be Mohammed al-Baradei, who's in Vienna to meet with his board of governors, said that he's very happy with the talks that have been taking place between Larijani, that's Iran's top nuclear negotiator, and EU Foreign Minister Javier Solana. But he also said that time is running out for a deal.
I think the international community is concerned about Iran's non-compliance with the Board and Security Council requirement, and they would like to see progress in that domain. They would like also to see progress in getting back all the parties to the negotiating table and start discussing the package of proposal presented by the six.
Yesterday, after 2 days of talks, Solana and Larijani said they've made progress and have agreed to meet again, possibly as early as this Thursday, to see if there's enough common ground for formal negotiations to end a stalemate over the Islamic Republic's insistence on its right to pursue uranium enrichment. U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, on her way to Canada today, reiterated the U.S. position that Iran must suspend its enrichment program before the West would start talks on an incentives package, but left open the possibility of talking during a temporary suspension. Now, we also today were visiting a paper. It is the paper called Shar. It is one of the main leading reformist papers, and while I was there interviewing the head of that paper, the paper was shut down. The Press Supervisory Board citing the reason for closure as publishing articles insulting to religious, political, and national figures and fomenting discord in violation of the orders of the Supreme National Council. Also later today, another paper, which was a monthly publication, was also pulled off the shelf. That due to a former dissident writing a poem obviously insulting to this government today. Back to you, John.
Rudy Bakhtiar live in Tehran. Rudy, thanks very much. Next, they were on the scene right after the deadly attacks of 9/11. Now, some of these responders are complaining of health problems. Our Douglas Kennedy reports live from Ground Zero. In the wake of the deadly attacks, our government made legal changes to make it easier to track terrorists, but has any of it made it easier to convict terrorists?
Some convictions, sometimes the government has shot itself in the foot, John.
Okay, more on that from the judge right after this. Our big story special coverage of the day America changed continues now. 5 years ago today, thousands of Americans flocked to Ground Zero. They removed rubble, desperately searched for any survivors. Now, many of these unsung heroes have become victims themselves with serious health problems. Big Story correspondent Douglas Kennedy live now at Ground Zero. Hi, Douglas.
Hey, John. Yeah, nearly 40,000 rescue workers responded to the call from Ground Zero. Now, a new study by Mount Sinai Hospital here in New York says 70% of them are becoming ill. Earlier today, I talked with one of those rescue workers, retired New York City detective Richard Volpe. Ground Zero on September 11th, and you stayed there about 6 months.
Correct.
And about a year later, you started developing some health problems.
Yes.
Describe those.
Basically, what I have is it's called IgA nephropathy. It's a kidney ailment, which basically the filters in your kidneys don't filter out the toxins in your body. It attacks your blood pressure, creatinine level, and your cholesterol as well, and high blood pressure.
And all of this you think is attributable to your time at Ground Zero?
Absolutely.
Volpe says his kidney problems are more common with a 70-year-old man than a 39-year-old man like himself. I'm joined now, John, by Jim Slavin of the New York City Police Firefighters Union. Jim, a lot of your guys are getting sick. What are you seeing?
We're seeing firefighters getting sick in record numbers. Since 9/11, we've had 1,000 firefighters retire with lung disabilities, and just as we predicted, we're starting to see more and more serious lung diseases such as cancers, and we actually had 3 firefighters that have died of lung-related ailments.
Now, Jim, you saw EPA, the former EPA chief Christy Todd Whitman, saying she gave you guys masks. You should have used the masks. How do you respond to that?
Well, the truth of the matter is the masks were not available to our firefighters until almost 3 weeks into the operation. But our firefighters knew the air was dangerous. They know any fire, the smoke is bad, and this was the worst possible smoke. It was pulverized concrete and glass and other toxic burning materials.
Now, obviously, a lot of people getting sick here, but still, it's very difficult to prove scientifically that they're getting sick because of the dust at Ground Zero. How do you prove that?
Well, when you look at the sheer numbers of firefighters and other rescue workers that are getting sick, and they all responded and operated at the World Trade Center disaster, you have to say there is a link. The fire department's own medical doctor says there is a link with all these first responders getting sick.
So what happens now? What do you want people to do? What are you going to do for your men who are getting ill?
Our firefighters stepped up. They knew the dangers. They went in to rescue the people. They stuck around to recover the remains of as many as possible. And now the New York State government has stepped up. They're providing benefits for the firefighters and other first responders. And the federal government stepped up and provided health funding for health screening and treatment. But that money is going to run out soon. So the federal government is going to have to step up again down the road to provide more funding to provide the treatment.
Jim Slavin from the Firefighters Union. John, a tragic day for America 5 years ago. Now it's becoming more tragic with people who are just here to help. Back to you.
Douglas Kennedy at Ground Zero. Douglas, thank you. So far in the U.S., we've convicted only one man in connection with 9/11, Zacarias Moussaoui, who was arrested in August 2001 and in custody at the time of the attacks. During his trial, he told the court he was to have piloted a 5th plane into the White House. Moussaoui is sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. How has the way we prosecute terrorists changed since 9/11? Let's ask Fox News senior judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano. By the way, Judge, we've also got some excerpts from the President's address to the nation tonight. At one point, he says, "This struggle has been called a clash of civilizations. In truth, it is a struggle for civilization. We are fighting to maintain the way of life enjoyed by free nations." Even Roger Baldwin, the founder of the ACLU, during World War II, did not object to some of the rights that were abridged by the President of the United States at the time. And even Roger Baldwin, the founder of the ACLU,
well, you're really putting me in some company, John.
You're looking at me sour. Said, "Hey, first you got to win the war, then you worry about rights. Shouldn't we worry about winning the war first and our rights second?"
Well, the government has taken the position that people should sacrifice certain liberties, give them to the government, if you will, in order to make it easier for the government to prosecute. And the government has, in fact, enacted a lot of legislation, the best known of which is the Patriot Act. There's also about 8 or 9 other pieces of legislation as well. In fact, the following has occurred. Only one person, as you say, has been prosecuted for 9/11.
14 are teed up.
14 are teed up. Only one conviction has been obtained for information obtained under the Patriot Act, and that was thrown out on appeal.
14 are teed up.
4 different judges, including 2 appointed by President Bush's father, have found the Patriot Act unconstitutional. So the policy argument is, and it's clear the American people want to give up some rights because these acts passed by overwhelming majorities. It's clear that people who say what I say are voices in the wilderness. But the policy argument is there some bitter irony in the notion that in order to defend freedom, we have to give up the freedoms that make the nation worth defending?
This is a question Abraham Lincoln faced.
Yes. Yes, and Lincoln was rejected by every court, including the Supreme Court, 3 of whose members he had appointed.
There wouldn't have been a court had he not held the nation together.
Well, there wouldn't have been a court over the South, although a lot of people think the South would have come back. Here's another interesting statistic for you. In the past 5 years, there have been fewer prosecutions for terrorism than in the 5 years preceding 9/11. Why is that? Well, the Patriot Act allows the government to gather information. It can hold that information. It can use it. It doesn't necessarily have to prosecute with it. So the ultimate question you ask, has it made it easier to gather information? Yes. Has it made it easier to get convictions? Not necessarily.
Is it, when you're in a war, do you worry so much about convictions or winning the war? I mean, you're the judge. I understand.
Yeah, well, if I'm wearing a uniform like General Kimmett, who was just here, and I have a weapon in my hands, I'm worried about staying alive and protecting the people behind me, absolutely. But if I'm doing what I do for a living, I'm worried about human freedom.
Judge Andrew Napolitano. Judge, as always, thank you. Coming up, they took our buildings down. They wanted to take our economy down, too, but they failed. We'll look at the state of our economy 5 years later, just ahead. Plus, former White House Press Secretary Ari Fleischer weighs in on the state of America since the 2001 attacks. You are watching a special edition of The Big Story. Special Big Story.
Don't worry, don't worry. Come on, where's your... Over here.
Our special Big Story coverage of the 5th anniversary of 9/11 continues now. We've been talking throughout the hour with members of President Bush's staff at the time of the 2001 attacks, getting their memories of that day. We're joined now by another one, the president's former spokesman, former White House Press Secretary Ari Fleischer. So, Ari, tonight we're going to hear the president address the nation. We've gotten some excerpts of the speech. He says, "We face an enemy determined to bring death and suffering into our homes. America did not ask for this war, and every American wishes it were over. So do I." A lot of people think he doesn't.
Oh, for heaven's sake. I've been with him when he met with the families of those who were wounded or relatives of those who were killed. There's not a soul in this country who wishes it was over more than him.
People say that about him. What do you think of that kind of criticism that paints him as nothing more than a warmonger?
Well, listen, I think that throughout our history we've had times where our nation's been divided, and the thing to do when there is a division is to lead on the basis of principle and fight for what you believe. And I think that's what he's doing. He'll also say in that speech tonight that it's not a clash of civilizations, it's a clash for civilization. And when you look at the Middle East and you look at what we need to do to bring peace to that region, I think he's right.
He says also, by standing with democratic leaders and reformers, by giving voice to the hopes of decent men and women, we are offering a path away from radicalism, and we are enlisting the most powerful force for peace and moderation in the Middle East, the desire of millions to be free. Are those millions who desire to be free backing him up enough by showing support for what the United States is doing in Iraq?
Some are, some aren't. And like history has often shown with the Arab world, they'll follow the winner. They'll wait, they'll see, and at the last minute, they'll throw in their lot with whoever is going to prevail. And that's a lesson he understands. It's part of the real politics of the Middle East. And I think that if we show signs of weakness, if we start to back out, Amin al-Zawahiri has said the first phase for Al-Qaeda is U.S. withdrawal from Iraq. If we do what they call phase 1 and we withdraw, the rest of the Arab world will look, watch, and say the United States is weak and nobody can count on them when they give their word.
Is the Bush legacy forever, for better or worse, going to be this war on terror?
I think so. I think presidents largely are known for their foreign policies. If it's a domestic issue, largely it's smaller bore type issues. But presidents who serve at momentous times, and I think FDR, it was true of World War I, Lincoln, this is what you are known for better or worse. The judgment, the verdict is still out on George Bush. And I think we're going to know in 10 or 15 years how successful we really are in Iraq.
Do you have a clear understanding of why the president's approval has plummeted and why the American people, apparently by 60% to 30% now, think that the war in Iraq was a mistake?
Well, John, I think we're an impatient country. We are used to getting things done quickly and done and then behind us. And World War II took 4 years. If today we had to fight a World War II against the very same Nazis with communications we have, with live, with internet, I'm not sure the American people would have patience for that either. It's part of the problem our society has of grappling with the worst and the most difficult news. And that especially is going to be true in the age of terror.
You have been retired now for a little while. You look rested and well. You miss it?
You know, I miss the president. I keep in touch with him, but I miss seeing him on a daily basis. I don't miss the hours. I don't miss the pace. I miss reporters one-on-one. I don't miss them in that briefing room.
Ari Fleischer. Ari, thanks very much for coming in. It's good to see you.
Thank you, John.
Next, from Washington to Wall Street, moments of silence to remember those killed on 9/11. Osama bin Laden wanted to knock out our economy that day, but Wall Street bounced back. How did that happen? You're watching the Fox News Channel, America's Newsroom. Wall Street holds a moment of silence for the victims of 9/11. The terrorists behind the deadly attacks aimed to take down the heart of our nation's economy, but they failed in that goal. Fox News business correspondent Terry Keenan joins me now. So why did they fail? That was a big blow.
Yeah, failed and pretty miserably, John. And you might remember in one of those early bin Laden tapes that he dropped off at Al Jazeera, he was taking credit for hurting the U.S. economy quite considerably, and this was in the months after the attack. And at the time, some economists might have concurred with him. But with the benefit of hindsight, we see that the economy has snapped back remarkably since 9/11. GDP has risen by $3 trillion. We've created 3.5 million new jobs. The unemployment rate has come down from the levels that it was at before 9/11. And, you know, going back to the old phrase, necessity is the mother of invention, the horrific acts of that day actually spurred some economic policies that really helped us recover from the bursting of the dot-com bubble. Because we were in a recession when 9/11 struck, but it turned out to be a very short, shallow recession, in part because the Federal Reserve poured on the juice, lowered interest rates to historic lows in the months after 9/11. We had the Bush tax cut plan. We had the airline bailout. We had the auto companies offering 0% financing. All of that kept us from going into a Japan-like situation. So, in fact, bin Laden's plan to harm our economy actually backfired.
He got oil prices up.
He did.
And why didn't that affect the economy more than it has?
Well, it's interesting because, in part, I think the U.S. economy is less dependent on oil than it used to be. And oil prices might have gone up anyway because we had the growth in China. That country continues to grow at about 10% a year. The boom in India, all this new demand for oil prices. So in part, it might have been due to 9/11, but not entirely. And in fact, oil prices fell right after 9/11 because people weren't traveling and everyone thought the recession was going to be much deeper than it was, and it turned out not to be.
The other thing is, you know, that horrific destruction in downtown Manhattan. A lot of people thought no Manhattanite, no office worker is ever going to want to work in a tall building in Manhattan again. That appears not to be the case.
They didn't know Manhattanites. And, you know, if you think about it, what would be the most contrary economic step that you could take on September 12th, 2001? It would be buying Manhattan real estate. And since that would have been the best buy since the Indians sold Manhattan back in the 1600s. And the real estate economy here in the city has snapped back incredibly. We've had the biggest building boom since 1929. So that's just a reflection of how 9/11 was not an economic event, just a horrible human event.
When they finally put up this new tower on the site downtown, is it going to be full?
I think it will be. You have Goldman Sachs, the most prestigious Wall Street firm, moving into 7 World Trade Center. Offices are booming. They're building schools down in lower Manhattan. So I think it'll be an easy sell.
Terry Keenan, our senior business correspondent. Terry, thanks very much. Up next on the big story, my word on controversial comments made by a prominent senator about the war in Iraq. You are watching the Fox News Channel, better known as America's Newsroom. Now it's time for your word. People who write to me at myword@foxnews.com. Jerry Exxon is upset we don't invade Pakistan to get bin Laden. What do we owe the Pakistanis? Why are we so hesitant to go into the mountains and get OBL? And why are we letting the government of Pakistan not allow us? Vice President Cheney says he believes we would have invaded Iraq even if we knew there were no WMDs there, and that upset Paul Peterson in Ann Arbor, Michigan. If the president said he was going to invade Iraq for the sole purpose of getting rid of Saddam, the American people overwhelmingly would not have supported him. The 9/11 movie still has people riled like Ed Hanning Jr. If ABC edits The Path to 9/11 because Bill Clinton is outraged, I will be very disappointed. I wonder if they would do the same for George Bush. I think not. Where in the Constitution does it say that Democrats control free speech? Blair Houghton is upset about my position that Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger is not a racist for saying a legislator friend of his was hot-blooded from her hot Black and Puerto Rican blood. She says he exposes his racist mindset, his carelessness, and his hypocrisy, and his unfitness, if that's a word, to lead one of the most powerful political divisions on the planet. I hope your next column is an apology. Blair, no apology, and I repeat, lighten up. That's your word. Time now for my word. Let's have a little contest. Who produced today's best? Did they really say that? Quote. The contenders today, the Venerable Andy Rooney, Senator Jay Rockefeller, and the Boston Globe editorial board. First, Senator Rockefeller. In an interview with CBS TV, Rockefeller said the world would be better off today if the United States had never invaded Iraq, even if that means Saddam Hussein would still be running Iraq. CBS asked the follow-up, did Rockefeller stand by that view, even if it meant Saddam Hussein would still be in power if the U.S. didn't invade? Answer from the senator, quote, yes. You got to admit, imagining Saddam out of his jail cell and back in charge of Iraq, that has to be a contender today. But so is the Boston Globe editorial board. Today it said, quoting now, in the long run, the reaction of the Bush administration may prove more harmful to the national interest than even these horrific attacks. Ah, Bush is worse than bin Laden? That's what one is left to conclude. So why don't they just come out and say that? Answer, it's too embarrassing, even for the Boston Globe. For lack of courage, the Boston Globe is out as a serious challenger. Then there's Andy Rooney, whose curmudgeonly style sometimes leads him into a rhetorical briar patch. Rooney said last night at the end of 60 Minutes with Katie Couric, it might be better if we figured out how to behave as a nation in a way that wouldn't make so many people in the world want to kill us. So, it's our fault? These are tough contestants, and we can argue endlessly, but I think the winner of my little contest today has to be Senator Rockefeller. After all, the Boston Globe editorialists and Andy Rooney are just media hacks. Nobody elected them to anything. But the senator, he represents his state, West Virginia, and an august body, the U.S. Senate. He really did say that, and he really should know better. That is my word. Write to me at myword@foxnews.com. See you back here tomorrow. Big story, 5 Eastern, 2 Pacific. Don't forget, President's Address of the Nation tonight, live right here on Fox at 9 p.m. Eastern. Now, special report with Britt Hume. Here's Britt.
Next on Special Report, the president prepares to speak to the nation as it remembers a day it can never forget. There were ceremonies in New York, in Pennsylvania, and at the Pentagon, all the places where the airplanes hit that day. And we'll have the latest from Afghanistan and Iraq, the wars that 9/11 spawned. And we'll take you to Guantanamo Bay, where leading 9/11 suspects now await trial. Plus a report on what some people think really happened on 9/11 and who is behind it. Will you hear this? All that coming after other headlines from the Fox desk in New York.
From America's Newsroom, I'm Harris Faulkner. New Jersey officials saying they have a right to know more about the federal government's domestic surveillance program. They're challenging a request from the feds to quash the state's investigation. State prosecutors wanting 10 New Jersey phone companies to hand over their records, their phone records. The federal government claiming compliance with the subpoenas or even acknowledging the program exists threatens national security. The state says the program is no longer secret. Space Shuttle Atlantis now docking with the International Space Station. Tomorrow, astronauts begin working on an addition to the Space Lab. Also, there was no damage found during another check of the shuttle's heat shield. There was concern that falling debris may have damaged the craft's belly during takeoff. Chicago's mayor vetoing a measure requiring so-called big box retailers to pay workers more than other employers. Supporters say the measure would guarantee employees to, quote, a living wage. But Richard Daley says making stores like Walmart pay higher prices, or salaries rather, would drive big businesses from the city. Oil prices plunging. The drop triggered by word Iran might suspend uranium enrichment. Oil falling 64 cents, closing at $65.61 a barrel. The decline also affected by the OPEC oil ministers meeting in Vienna, the organization deciding to continue pumping crude at higher rates. Our next news break coming your way at the bottom of the hour. Special Report with Britt Hume starts right now.
Welcome to Washington. I'm Britt Hume in a field in Pennsylvania, at the Pentagon outside Washington, and at what has come to be known as Ground Zero in New York. There were ceremonies today to mark the terrorist attacks on this nation exactly 5 years ago. Our coverage begins tonight with White House correspondent Wendell Goler.
Once again, they came together vowing never to forget, though for some it's clear the pain of that day 5 years ago is still a heavy burden. At New York's Ground Zero, the nation again embraced a mayor who guided more than his city.
We've come back to remember the valor of those we've lost, those who innocently went to work that day, and the brave souls who went in after them.
In a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, we recalled the 40 airline passengers and crew members who fought the first battle in the war on terror.
5 years ago, upon this field of honor, lives were lost so that lives were saved, and thus heroes were made over the skies of Shanksville.
And at the Pentagon outside Washington, the vice president defended the continuing response to the worst ever attack on U.S. soil.
This nation has defeated tyrants and liberated death camps, raised the lamp of liberty to every captive land. We have no intention of ignoring or appeasing history's latest gang of fanatics trying to murder their way to power.
As in each of the past 5 years, there were moments of silence when each of the 4 planes crashed. 2 more in New York when each of the Twin Towers fell. And again this year, loved ones read the names of each of the 2,749 people who were lost there, struggling when it came to their own lives changed forever.
And my incredible wife.
And my beloved husband.
And my fiance. My love, my best friend. And my guardian angel.
Fears of an anniversary attack prompted tighter security. An abandoned backpack cleared New York's Penn Station. An unclaimed personal data device led United Airlines to divert a San Francisco-bound flight to Dallas. The anniversary drew mixed international notice, a moment of silence at the UN. Former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher attended a ceremony at the White House. The French paper Le Monde put the New York ceremony on page 1, but its lead editorial was entitled Bush's Mistakes. It was Le Monde that declared 5 years ago, "We are all Americans." But the war in Iraq has soured the French, and polls suggest left this country more divided than ever before over the administration's conduct of the war on terror. New York Governor George Pataki told Fox News he longs for what got us through the 9/11 attack.
There were no Republicans or Democrats, Christian or Jew, black or white. We were all Americans on that day and in the weeks thereafter.
Democrats, too, spoke of recapturing that feeling. Election year politics put on hold, if only for a day. In Washington, Wendell Goler, Fox News.
President Bush was at Ground Zero on Sunday and at a ceremony with first responders in New York this morning before traveling to the two other places where the 9/11 attacks were formally commemorated. And while he spoke privately with many people, he did not say a public word today, though of course he will address the nation from the White House tonight. Chief White House correspondent Brett Baer reports.
Serenaded by the New York Police Department choir and surrounded by hundreds of uniformed first responders, the President and the First Lady began the 5th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks a mile and a half from Ground Zero in Lower Manhattan, a solemn ceremony at the Fort Pitt Firehouse. The battalion chief there was killed when the World Trade Center towers came down, and all that remained of Ladder Company 18's truck from that day was one door recovered from the rubble. The backdrop for the anniversary remembrance.
We come here on this day to remember those who lost their lives so that we also may choose life.
The President and Mrs. Bush bowed their heads for back-to-back moments of silence at 8:46 and 9:03, the precise moments the hijacked planes hit the two towers. The President made no remarks. But Sunday night, after laying a wreath in small reflecting pools at Ground Zero, he reflected on the defining moment of his presidency, saying he was approaching the anniversary with a heavy heart, but renewed resolve.
I vowed that I'm never going to forget the lessons of that day. And it just reminded me that there's still an enemy out there that would like to inflict the same kind of damage again.
From New York, the President and Mrs. Bush flew to Shanksville, Pennsylvania for a wreath-laying ceremony at the site where United Airlines Flight 93 crashed. The first couple spent time with victims' family members and friends, speaking privately about the courageous actions of those on the flight who fought the hijackers. For the first time since the first anniversary of the attacks, the President and First Lady visited all three attack sites, finishing the day at the Pentagon. After a brief ceremony there, the President and the First Lady, both visibly moved, met with victims' family members. Senior aides say the president's emotional day will provide a backdrop for a reflective speech from the Oval Office tonight. According to White House officials, the president will say in his 17-minute speech, the war against terrorism is a, quote, struggle for civilization that will require a unified country against a determined enemy that wants to strike again. Aides say the president will talk about what has become the divisive war in Iraq, but will spend the most time remembering 9/11 victims and heroes. Britt.
Brett, thank you. As Brett noted, the President will address the nation on this anniversary at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. We will carry the President's remarks from the Oval Office live. Please tune in. 5 years ago, to show their unity in the face of the 9/11 attacks, more than 100 members of Congress, Republicans and Democrats, appeared on the steps of the Capitol and sang "God Bless America" just a few minutes ago. That's approximately half that many members, including the House and Senate leaders of both parties, repeated that event, singing this time the national anthem. Congress was not in session today, and most members were in their home districts and states, many attending 9/11 commemorations there. Next on Special Report, 5 years after those attacks, the war on terrorism goes on. We'll have the latest events in Afghanistan and Iraq next. The 9/11 attacks have led to counterattacks by American armed forces in 2 countries, and those conflicts are still ongoing. From the latest from both Afghanistan and Iraq, we turn now to Pentagon correspondent Mike Emanuel.
In Afghanistan today, a funeral for the governor of Eastern Coast Province, who was assassinated Sunday by Taliban fighters. Shortly after this video was taken, a suicide bomber struck the funeral, killing 5 Afghan police and a 12-year-old boy, and wounding dozens. 4 government ministers were leaving the service when the bomb went off, but were not hurt. As U.S. troops gathered on this day for a moment of silence to commemorate the September 11th attacks, their commander laid a wreath at a memorial and promised to continue the fight.
Much work still needs to be done here. But the enemy in Afghanistan, they will fail, just as he's failed elsewhere within the world. The war on terrorism began here in Afghanistan, and it continues today.
Part of the work in Afghanistan is being carried out by NATO forces in the south, trying to take out those still loyal to the Taliban who are seeking to destabilize the government in Kabul. The NATO mission is called Operation Medusa, which was launched 10 days ago. NATO reports 92 Taliban fighters have been killed in the most recent fighting in southern Kandahar province. Meanwhile, in Iraq, a minibus loaded with explosives targeted an Iraqi army recruiting center in central Baghdad, killing at least 16 people and wounding 7. This comes as the Iraqi parliament debated legislation Sunnis fear could split Iraq into 3 parts. Last week, the largest Shiite bloc submitted legislation that calls for a 3-part federation that would create a distinct autonomous state in the predominantly Shiite south, similar to the Kurdish section of the country in the north. Despite debate over Iraq's future, Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice said the U.S. has made a down payment on a different kind of Middle East in which there is hope, prosperity, and democracy, although there's more to do.
I think the good news now is that even though we haven't finished the job, we have at least really begun the job now of rooting out extremism.
Secretary Rice also said that the U.S. will eventually find Osama bin Laden. Regarding the search, U.S. intelligence officials say more resources are being devoted to finding bin Laden and other senior Al-Qaeda leaders, and they insist leads do come in regarding bin Laden's whereabouts. One senior official told me if people think other priorities have gotten in the way of finding Osama bin Laden and capturing and killing Osama bin Laden, then there are a lot of people in the intelligence community who would take exception with that. Britt?
Mike, thank you. Next on Special Report, we'll tell you how the U.S. reacted today to Iran's offer to suspend briefly its nuclear enrichment program activities, and we'll take you to Guantanamo Bay. That's next. American officials and those at the United Nations are casting a wary eye on Iran's latest effort to head off UN sanctions in the standoff over its nuclear program. The Iranians have offered to briefly suspend their uranium enrichment activities in hopes of restarting negotiations. Correspondent James Rosen reports on the reaction that suggestion got today.
Shortly before arriving in Halifax, Canada, to thank residents there for sheltering Americans stranded on 9/11, Secretary of State Rice responded to published reports suggesting Iran, hoping to avoid economic sanctions at the UN Security Council, has now for the first time offered a short-term suspension of uranium enrichment. I don't think there is an offer at this point, Rice told reporters aboard her plane. We can have discussions, but there has to be a suspension. And as far as I know, the Iranians have not yet said that they would suspend prior to negotiations. As to time limitations, Rice added, I haven't heard any Iranian offer, so I don't know what to make of that.
Did you reach any compromise on uranium?
Rice's remarks came one day after Ali Larijani, Iran's nuclear negotiator, met for 7 hours with European Union Foreign Policy Chief Javier Solana in Vienna. From this meeting came word of Tehran's newfound willingness to halt enrichment by 1 or 2 months, reportedly in exchange for security guarantees and other concessions.
Many of the misunderstandings were removed.
We are going to meet again next week, and I want to say that, as I said, that the meeting has been worth it.
Today, Vienna hosted the 35-nation Board of Governors meeting for the International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA. The agency's Director General Mohammed El-Baradei said Iran's cooperation with the UN is, quote, much overdue.
The window of opportunity, however, is not very long. I think
the international community is concerned about Iran's non-compliance with the Board and Security Council requirement, and they would like to see progress.
Just last week, America's top arms control official rejected a short-term suspension by Iran.
We are not, for our part, going to fall into the trap of short-term pauses.
But some analysts are now predicting that if Iran really has made such an offer, Washington will face pressure from European allies to accept it.
If the Iranians make it a firm offer, basically the rest of the Security Council is going to come back to us and say, okay, let's work with this.
Secretary Rice reiterated to reporters on her plane that if the Iranians suspend their uranium enrichment program, it has to be verifiable. Then and only then, she made clear, will action against Iran be suspended in the UN Security Council. Britt?
James, thank you. Major tragic events have a long history of spawning conspiracy theories about how they could have occurred. The litany of presidential assassinations is replete with such musings, and the 9/11 atrocities have proved no exception. Chief Washington correspondent Jim Angle reports on those who believe the Bush administration planned the 9/11 attacks.
For most Americans, 9/11 is remembered as a stunning tragedy, but for some it was also a massive conspiracy engineered by the U.S. government.
We have treason! We have mass murder! They blew up the World Trade Center!
It was a psyop, a psychological operation. It is all a hoax. And how they did it exactly, we don't know.
Morgan Reynolds, a former Labor Department economist, sincerely believes there were no hijacked airliners. Others believe planes did hit the buildings, but that the government knew about it in advance and let it happen.
Well, I'll say it had to be by design. It had to be contrived. It had to be arranged.
Those are the two different strains in what its members call the truth movement.
There's so-called LEHOP, which is let it happen on purpose, that the government simply had a stand down and allowed 19 young Arabs to finish their task. The strong complicity argument for the U.S. government is MEHOP, make it happen on purpose, that the government actively conducted 9/11.
Skeptics may differ on some details, but not on what they claim motivated U.S. officials to murder their own countrymen.
It's about oil, Israel, and logistics for the global domination project.
The motive, to be blunt and concise about it, would be resource theft and world domination by the American empire. That's it in a nutshell.
As with any conspiracy theory, the skeptics offer elaborate details. They contend the Twin Towers could not have been brought down, for instance, by plane crashes and fires from jet fuel, that it had to be explosives placed in the building well in advance.
That points right to the White House in that it's an inside job, because you would need access to these buildings. You would need security bought off or looking the other way.
There was no photographic evidence. There was no eyewitness evidence that these were in fact controlled explosions.
The National Institute of Standards and Technology spent 3 years examining the damage, looking at 7,000 photographs and 150 hours of videotape. The chief investigator says it is unusual for fire to topple a building, but says the jet fuel created fires as hot as 1,000 degrees, weakening the steel skeleton of the building.
You lose pretty much 85 to 90% of the strength and stiffness of steel. In some regards, it becomes like Play-Doh, very weak and malleable, very plastic.
But the skeptics are unimpressed and insist on another investigation, even a grand jury look into 9/11. But with several investigations already completed, it's unlikely any official report will ever erase their doubts. In Washington, Jim Angle, Fox News.
British Prime Minister Tony Blair was given less than a hero's welcome today as he arrived in Beirut to discuss the next steps in the Mideast. This at a time when the two key Palestinian factions seem to be coming together in an effort to end international sanctions. But the number 2 man in Al-Qaeda, meanwhile, issued another threat. Chief Mideast correspondent Jennifer Griffin is standing by with more on all of that. Jennifer?
Britt, Al-Qaeda marked the anniversary of 9/11 today by issuing a series of promotional videos. Among them was one by Ayman al-Zawahiri, as you mentioned, an attempt to show the world that Al-Qaeda is still standing, even though most of its top leaders are holed up in the tribal areas along the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Bin Laden's number 2, Zawahiri, said the next Al-Qaeda attacks would be against Israel and in the Mideast Gulf region, suggesting the group might target vital oil installations in an attempt to cripple the world economy. Al-Qaeda has yet to carry out a successful attack inside Israel, but increasingly Israeli and Palestinian officials have warned of Al-Qaeda copycat groups emerging in the Gaza Strip. Zawahiri added in the video released today that, quote, any attack on Jews is justified. Meanwhile, in Lebanon, British Prime Minister Tony Blair became the first Western leader to visit the war-torn country since the 34-day war with Israel ended last month. Mr. Blair, viewed as a lame duck after announcing in recent days that he would step down within a year, is making a final push for Middle East peace, meeting Lebanon's Prime Minister Fouad Siniora, offering $75 million to rebuild Lebanon. This Irish protester taunted Mr. Blair for his pro-U.S. stance during the war. 5,000 other Lebanese anti-Blair protesters were kept away. Hezbollah's 2 parliament members refused to meet Mr. Blair, as did the Speaker of Parliament, Nabi Berri, who served as a go-between for Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah during the war. From Lebanon, Mr. Blair called the announcement today by Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh, who serves as the Palestinian Prime Minister, that they intend to form a unity government. Mr. Blair called it, quote, potentially hugely significant. By agreeing to the new arrangement, the Hamas government elected in January has effectively buckled under the pressure of U.S., European, and Israeli sanctions imposed after Hamas took power and refused to renounce violence and recognize Israel. According to the deal, the Hamas cabinet will be dissolved in 48 hours, but many details must still be worked out. It's still not clear, Britt, whether the new Palestinian unity government will recognize Israel outright. That is the key condition for the U.S. and others to resume the funding of the Palestinian Authority. And if this government does not do so, it will remain as isolated and cash-starved as the last Palestinian government. Britt?
Well, Jennifer, what would a new unity government look like? I mean, Hamas won the election. Why would they? I mean, what's this supposed to? Who will be whom?
Well, it's a good question. The president will remain Mahmoud Abbas, who is, of course, from Yasser Arafat's old Fatah party. Prime Minister will be Ismail Haniyeh, who's the top Hamas leader in the Gaza Strip. But what's interesting is the wrangling that's taking place right now over the Interior Ministry position. That's a position that's designed to control the security forces and clean up the Gaza Strip. Right now, Hamas wants the Fatah people to take over, and Fatah wants Hamas to take over. So it'll be interesting to see how they work that out. Britt?
All right, Jennifer, thank you very much. We've got to take a break here to hear from our sponsors and update the other headlines. When we come back, will you hear what Senator Rockefeller is saying about Saddam Hussein? That story next on The Grapevine. Special report continues in a moment. First, though, let's get an update on the other headlines and a look ahead at tonight's Fox report from Shepard Smith, standing by tonight at Ground Zero in New York. Shep?
Britt, forecasters now say Hurricane Florence is moving north and east and away from Bermuda. That storm tearing off roofs and knocking out power to thousands there. So far, there are no reports of injuries, but our Foxcasters say they expect Florence to continue away from the United States coast. Meanwhile, the National Hurricane Center now says Tropical Storm Gordon has formed in the open Atlantic. It is the 7th named storm of this hurricane season. The polygamous leader Warren Jeffs appearing briefly in a Utah court by video hookup today. A preliminary hearing postponed at the request of one of his attorneys. Jeffs faces charges of rape as an accomplice for allegedly arranging marriages of underage girls to older men. He was arrested last month in Nevada. Slower growth may be ahead for the U.S. economy. Some of the nation's top business economists now say that the pace of expansion is down from earlier this year. High energy costs cited as one reason, and the risk in the economy expanding. Well, today, stocks up, but slightly. The Dow +4, the NASDAQ up 7, and the S&P up just a fraction. Coming up tonight on the Fox Report, 5 years later, remembering 9/11. Tonight, as part of our coverage, we'll be showing you that day as it happened on Fox News Channel. That's 30 minutes from now from Ground Zero, right here on America's Newscast, right after Britt.
And now the most riveting 2 minutes in television, the latest from the political grapevine. The Senate Intelligence Committee's ranking Democrat, who voted to authorize the war in Iraq, now says he would have voted against it if he'd known about the administration's, quote, deliberately cynical manipulation before the war. But West Virginia Senator Jay Rockefeller goes even farther, saying the world would be better off today if the U.S. had never invaded Iraq, even if that meant Saddam Hussein would still be in power. Rockefeller told CBS News that Saddam, quote, wasn't going to attack us. He would have been isolated there, adding, quote, we wouldn't have depleted our resources, preventing us from prosecuting a war on terror, which is what this is all about, end quote. Democratic Senate candidate Ned Lamont ripped his Connecticut opponent Joe Lieberman last week for scolding Bill Clinton over the Monica Lewinsky scandal on the Senate floor in 1998, telling the New York Times that Lieberman should have handled the matter privately. But Lamont saw things differently at the time, writing Lieberman, quote, I supported your statement because Clinton's behavior was outrageous. A Democrat had to stand up and state as much, and I hope that your statement was the beginning of the end, end quote. Lamont is standing by his latest comments, but a Lieberman spokesman says Lamont is, quote, so desperate to lash out that he didn't seem to care that he was completely contradicting himself, end quote. ABC changed several scenes in last night's miniseries, Path to 9/11, in response to former Clinton officials who called it unfairly critical of their failure to kill or capture Osama bin Laden. The network shortened several events, officials say, never happened, removed a reference to impeachment, and cut 2 scenes linking Clinton's indecision on bin Laden to his preoccupation with the Monica Lewinsky scandal. It also added 3 disclaimers, making clear that the film fictionalized certain events. But all that was not enough to please President Clinton. A spokesman for him called the scenes involving Clinton officials, quote, utterly and completely false, saying, quote, ABC regrettably decided not to tell the truth. Offended Christians have sent nearly 2,000 letters to the University of Virginia student newspaper, the Cavalier Daily, calling on the paper to apologize for a series of cartoons mocking their religion, including one portraying the Virgin Mary with a, quote, immaculately transmitted rash. Editor-in-Chief Michael Slavin says the paper will not apologize simply because someone is offended, saying newspaper policy allows cartoons to ridicule a group for its own, quote, opinions or actions. But Slavin did issue an apology for a religious cartoon in February after a widespread student protest that cartoon poked fun at the Muslim prophet Muhammad. Over the weekend, Republican Senate leaders Bill Frist of Tennessee, Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, and Arlen Specter of Pennsylvania traveled to the detention center at Guantanamo, Cuba, where 14 captured terror suspects, including a dozen allegedly engaged in planning and executing the 9/11 atrocities, are now housed. Congressional correspondent Major Garrett went with them, the first reporter with a camera crew to visit the camp since the transfer.
3 Republican senators toured Camp Delta at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, only days after 9/11 mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and 13 other known Al-Qaeda or Taliban terrorists and conspirators arrived from secret CIA prisons last week. The head of detention operations said the terrorists' arrival hasn't made his job any tougher.
The fact that we have Khalid Sheikh Mohammed here is just another detainee as far as we are concerned.
Harris said the Gitmo detainees were already dangerous enough before Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and the others arrived.
They have tried to kill our troopers here, just as they tried to kill them on the battlefield.
Army Colonel Wade Dennis showed the senators a typical cell, this one in Camp 1. It's 1 detainee per cell, 1 metal bunk, 1 puncture-proof mattress.
It's a stab-proof to where you take a knife and you're not going to get anything into it.
The U.S. provides a uniform, personal necessities, and religious items. An arrow on each bunk points to Mecca for daily prayers. Each detainee receives a Quran, translations available in 9 different languages. The yellow cone alerts all personnel not to disturb daily prayers. Even so, senators were told guards were pelted with spit, urine, or feces more than 400 times last year. Better behaved detainees live in Camp 4's communal cells. They get board games and the biggest of Gitmo's recreation areas. But in a cell like this, 10 detainees attacked camp guards in May after one faked a suicide. It took more than 100 troops to subdue the detainees. The troublemakers were all moved out, but Colonel Dennis still frets about future problems.
And this camp right here is a camp that is very conducive to that.
The camp hospital includes a pharmacy, radiology unit, operating room, and dentist. The senators learned 295 operations have been performed, 22 prosthetic limbs provided, 5,000 vaccinations administered. The maximum security unit in Camp 5 modeled after a prison in Indiana, complete with cuffs and Velcro neck protectors. In this interrogation room, a detainee will sit in the Lazy Boy recliner. After crossing Guantanamo Bay for the flight back to the capital, the senators appeared satisfied.
The detainees, if you look at the care that they get, the health care that they get, is better than the health care than the typical American gets back in the States.
Yeah, I don't think any member of Congress who visited Guantanamo would come away with the impression that these prisoners are not being treated in a humane fashion.
Congress is now trying to write a law covering detainee interrogation and trials under military commissions.
We talked to them in some detail about the specifics as to what they need and what we can legislate cannot be done, so that this visit was very, very timely to help us do our job.
Meanwhile, U.S. guards at Guantanamo maintain a constant vigil among more than 460 angry detainees. In Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, Major Garrett, Fox News.
Although Iran, as we reported earlier in the program, appears to be trying to head off international sanctions over its nuclear program, it seems its domestic policies are about the same as ever. Correspondent Rudy Bakhtiar had an unexpected first-hand experience with that during a recent interview.
It's a simple cartoon published in Iran's leading reformist newspaper, Sharq. 2 chess pieces, an angry black donkey and a white horse, facing each other below the words, "Different rules of the game." The paper's policy director, Mohammad Atrianfar, was telling Fox News that there was a rumor it was going to get him shut down when the phone rang with the bad news that he was indeed being shut down. He says the government saw the cartoon as an attack on Iran's President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the donkey following a foolish policy path with the white horse of the West. But he maintains that the cartoons in Sharq have no intended subject, a kind of Rorschach test to draw out public opinion. When we asked people on the streets of Tehran what they thought of the drawing, most of them had no idea what it meant. And people who did thought the black donkey was George Bush. Only one person said it had something to do with Ahmadinejad. The official government statement doesn't mention the cartoon specifically, but cites the paper for publishing articles insulting to religious, political, and national figures, and fomenting discord in violation of orders of the Supreme National Security Council. Sharq was the first newspaper closed under Ahmadinejad's administration, but one of the last reformist papers left. Later in the day, a monthly publication was also closed for publishing a poem by a dissident writer. Many of the paper's employees have been through this before, having worked at some of the over 100 newspapers closed by the Islamic Republic in the past decade.
Now, a newspaper that represents the voice of the people no longer exists.
In Tehran, Rudy Bakhtiar, Fox News.
Next on Special Report, how has life changed since 9/11? What's been achieved? We'll discuss those questions with the Fox All-Stars after a break.
And when we think of them, it will always be with a special feeling of empathy and sorrow. We will always understand the pain of their families, and our nation will forever look with reverence upon their place, this place where their lives ended. 9/11 is a day of national unity. The memories stay with all of us because the attack was directed at all of us. We were meant to take it personally, and we still do take it personally.
Two distinct moods there from Vice President Cheney's remarks out at the Pentagon earlier today. One emotional, the other stern in tone. Some analytical observations on this day now from Fred Barnes, executive editor of the Weekly Standard, Mort Kondracki, executive editor of Roll Call, and Mara Lassen, national political correspondent of National Public Radio, Fox News contributors all. I don't know about all of you, but I could, this day, we've had 5 of these anniversaries now. This one the whole thing seemed more vivid to me than it had in any of the others. In looking back as we do now over these 5 years, what strikes you most, Mara?
Well, I think what strikes me is just how America was changed. I think there's a big debate about exactly how it did and what should happen next. But I think that 9/11 is a day of national unity. I think Cheney was right on that. And I think it is being celebrated today. And 5 is a big anniversary. I think there is a difference between today and all the other anniversaries. But it was a day of national unity, and it was a day when the country came together. I don't think it's as together now. But it's, you know, I think life has changed in many ways, but also life has stayed the same. We haven't been attacked again. Now, that is a result of some of the changes that the government has made, but also this country has not been as vulnerable over these 5 years as Europeans and people in other areas have been.
You know, I simply cannot get over this ABC movie, which I watched last night. It is the most mesmerizing.
The docudrama, the 9/11,
the
Path to 9/11
9/11. It is so worth watching, and I don't know whether people want to TiVo the president or TiVo the Path to 9/11 for the installment too. But it is devastating about the inability of the country to envision what we were going to go through, and portrayals of the savagery of the enemy in graphic terms. I mean, we all sort of know it, but to see it well dramatized is phenomenal. And you know, I'm afraid that we've lapsed back into a belief that we can not protect ourselves as well as we need to. I mean, the fact that people would be crowing about the National Security Agency spying program, the terrorist surveillance program, complaining about it, when in event after event after event, things that ought to have been done pre-9/11 were not done. We were not protecting ourselves well enough. This is a whole argument. We know that those people are out there, that they want to do us. They want to kill us all if they possibly can, and for us to we don't have to give up the Constitution. We have to, but we do have to give up some of our freedom. We do have to protect some of our targets more better. And the idea that I think we've forgotten 9/11. I really do. I think we're not at war.
We are at war. That's one of the things we learned on 9/11, that we were at war. The war had already been going on against the United States. After 9/11, we began to fight back. A pretty high cost, 3,000 Americans dying. But it really did. It didn't change everything, 9/11 didn't, but it changed a lot. I mean, our politics now, after 10 years, Charles Krauthammer was called a holiday from history, in which, you know, the Soviet Union and communism fell in 1991, and then that 10 years before 2001 was an era where the United States, I think most of us believe we weren't seriously threatened. Though there were terrorist attacks, and if you were tuned into the intelligence, you knew that there was this fever, this religious fever sweeping across Islam and picking up young men and turning them into bloodless terrorists in different countries around the world. And it's still expanding to some extent into England and other countries like that. But it changed the politics, made national security the most important issue again in our foreign policy. It made fighting the war on terror the centerpiece, and the pursuit of democracy around the world being one of the chief tools in fighting that war on terror, believing that democracies are not going to be terrorist. So the U.S. has changed. It's not. I read these newspaper stories, and they go into the point of, well, how much has it changed your personal life? You know, if you live out in the suburbs somewhere in a city, well, not much, unless you take airplane flights and you run into a lot of security at the airports. But that's not the point. It's the bigger things that have changed, not the petty parts of life.
I think we lost our sense of invulnerability. I mean, the United States, except for Pearl Harbor, had never really been attacked before, and that wasn't in the continental homeland. I mean, this is something completely new. And think about how much worse it could be if the enemy acquires weapons of mass destruction, which surely they're working on.
Yeah, and look, you know, you say that we lost our sense of invulnerability. That means that we have changed. I mean, not that people forget that we're at war. I think a couple of things that have happened. One is Al-Qaeda itself has been crippled, yet the threat of Islamic terrorism has grown because as many Al-Qaeda members as we've killed or captured, I think that more have sprung up to take their place.
We're going to take a break here. When we come back, we'll look ahead at the president's address tonight, and we'll ask the question, why is that political unity that was there for so brief a period of time now gone? Stay tuned.
The truth is that neither this country nor the international community had really organized itself to confront this threat. It was simply getting bigger and getting more virulent, and it was really time to confront it. I think the good news now is that even though we haven't finished the job, we have at least really begun the job now of rooting out extremism.
Secretary of State Rice today on what she considers the progress that we've made in dealing with the terrorist threat. This comes at a time when, as we noted, the nation has paused to remember. There was no political discord in the air today, but the air at all other times, and for some years now, has been filled with it, as intense as it ever was before, at a time when there's, it's been poisonous. Why did it get so poisonous so seemingly quickly after the 9/11 attacks?
Well, I mean, look, Iraq was a big part of it, and the Iraq debate began before the 2002 elections. Iraq was not used in the
two or four.
Two. It was not used politically in the 2002 election, but Homeland Security was, and terrorism was. And I think the administration made it political. They seized the Democrats wanted to have a Homeland Security Department. The Bush administration was against it. Then the Bush administration flipped, and when the Democrats showed the slightest lack of willingness to enact the Homeland Security Department the way he wanted to, with the civil service rules that he wanted to, the Republicans leapt on them and made them all out to be seen as weak on terrorism. And it seems to me that was the beginning of the polarization.
Democrats did force 11 votes. Because some puny little union wanted certain rules to be changed. I mean, it was pathetic. No. Here's what you had, Mort. You had a huge national security issue, and you had Democrats wanting voting on the basis of some little work rules. I mean, who was paying attention?
Fight over that.
Here's the problem, Britt. There was never unity. There was only unity in sorrow. There was never unity in strategy.
I disagree with that. The Patriot Act was passed by overwhelming majorities. I think that if you ask Democrats today, they would say, of course, we want a Department of Homeland Security. What the attack on them was in the 2002 campaigns was that they're for terrorists because they won't vote for this particular version of this department.
I never heard that.
They were weak on terrorism.
They were weak on terrorism. Okay. They had pictures of them next to Osama bin Laden. Yeah, they quibbled, but quibbling is what the legislative process is, and you could have either come to a compromise on it and passed it with a lot of unity, or used it as a wedge issue. And I think that
So that's the source of it all, huh?
I think that's one of the things. I think there were a lot of other forces driving the parties apart, and I agree with Fred. Those forces existed before 9/11, and they were certainly present afterwards.
Let me posit another possibility. America was united, as Fred said, in grief, or at least at a time when it was wounded. The recovery was astonishing when you think about it. I mean, the war in Afghanistan was waged, despite the fact that there's still some resurgence over there. It had succeeded. It is not the Al-Qaeda stronghold it once was. The economy, which was sliding into recession at the time, went into recession and came out, and has recovered and has been remarkably strong, although there are things about it to criticize, as there always are. But in terms of crippling the country, it never happened. The country sort of
the terrorist attack didn't cripple the country.
Didn't it? And other things have come along and have failed too as well. But my point is that if the country had not recovered as effectively, things would not have seemed normal enough for people to figure they could get back to business as usual, which is political.
It wasn't like World War II when there's a draft and every draft-age man is over there fighting.
Well, look, before 9/11, the country was polarized. It was polarized by the 2000 election, and it reverted to form. But boy,
polarized before the 2000 election.
Bush gave his enemies a lot to beat him up with, including Iraq. Now, it's surely not all Bush's fault. The Democrats hated him to begin with because for cultural reasons, if nothing else. But there was a lot of ammunition that he distributed.
Yeah, they hated him even more after they lost 2 straight elections. They got whooped. And now here's a problem with the Democrats that is coming across, I think, to people, and that is that they don't believe in the war on terror. They think the war on terror is merely a Bush political strategy, and I think people are recognizing that.
That's it for the panel, but stay tuned for a look back at a day when the country looked back. That's next. Finally tonight, we hope to see you later for the president's speech at 9. But in the meantime, we leave you with a few of the sights and sounds of a day when this country remembered a day this country will never forget.
Amazing grace, how how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see.
It was the day that America changed. Our collective sense of security at home wiped out in an instant, disappearing along with thousands of lives. The World Trade Center, the Pentagon, Shanksville, Pennsylvania, scenes of horror and heroism. Tonight, reflecting on the past and looking ahead. President Bush right now preparing to address the nation. What the White House says he will and will not mention. The terrorists behind 9/11 with a new message and a new warning. The latest threat and what U.S. intelligence says about it. Second by second, minute by minute, we watched, as did you.
Another plane just flew into the second tower.
From the first frantic moments to the terrible realization that America was under attack. Tonight, a look back on 9/11 as it happened.
Live from Ground Zero in Lower Manhattan, this is the Fox Report with Shepard Smith.
And good evening from New York City, 5 years to the day after the worst terror attack on the United States. Today, this city and the nation remember 9/11 and vow never to forget. Bells rang 4 times this morning here in the pit, followed by 4 moments of silence, marking the moment each plane crashed into the World Trade Center and each tower collapsed. Friends and loved ones gathering here as they do each and every year to read the names of each and every victim and pay tribute to the heroes who died trying to save them. A woman who lost her nephew says this is one wound that time has not healed.
Every year you think, oh, he would have been 25 this year. Maybe he would have been married, you know, maybe he would have bought his first house. You didn't know, you know, because he was so young, his life was all ahead of him, really. So it really doesn't get easier. It gets harder in a way.
Victim's sister says 9/11-2001 will always seem like yesterday. Our senior correspondent, Eric Shawn, on Fox Top Story Live here at Ground Zero. Eric.
Shepard, again they came to remember, to honor, and to mourn. It may have been 5 years, but the memories are still so fresh, the pain so intense, what happened here still so vivid. The family members descended into the pit behind me, Ground Zero, 7 stories down, and one by one put roses and flowers and other mementos in 2 reflecting pools. Those 2 pools, squares filled with water, that were symbols representing the footprints of Tower 1 and Tower 2, those mighty towers that are no longer with us. There was a devastating toll, name by name, read by the loved ones, a mournful roll call honoring the 2,749 people who perished here on that day 5 years ago.
Michael George Arjinsky.
Louis Arena.
Barbara Jean Arostagui.
Adam P. Arias.
Michael.
They had lost their loved ones. America had lost our illusions. The sorrowful procession continued for hours this morning amid amazing grace, and God bless America. Words of support and comfort, a day of tribute and tears and overwhelming emotion. They clutched photographs, cards, mementos, pictures. Children wore their hats of their deceased firefighter and police officers, fathers. It is indeed sacred ground. There were the 4 moments of silence, 2 for when the planes hit and 2 for when those towers fell. fell. Yet despite the crushing sadness this morning, there was some optimism. That message from former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani of faith, hope, and strength.
5 years from the date of the attack that changed our world, we've come back to remember the valor of those we've lost. Those who innocently went to work that day, and the brave souls who went in after them.
In about 10 minutes from now, there'll be the dramatic display, the tribute in light. The twin beams will pierce the heavens, soaring into the sky until dawn, evoking the vanished towers and honoring those who were killed. Many, the time has lessened with the anger and with the sorrow. For the others, it has not, as today we remember what happened here 5 years ago and are mindful of the threat that still exists. Shepard.
Eric Shawn live here at Ground Zero. Now 200 miles south of here, a tribute at the Pentagon not only to the 184 people who died in the attack there, but to the members of the armed services who fought the war on terror in the 5 years since. Vice President Cheney and the Secretary of State the Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld delivering emotional speeches to those whose lives were forever changed.
We will always understand the pain of their families, and our nation will forever look with reverence upon this place where their lives ended.
The Vice President vowing the United States will not appease those he calls history's latest gang of fanatics. Rumsfeld saying the United States military knows how much hard work and sacrifice is still ahead. Megan Kendall with the Fox Report now live from the Pentagon. Megan.
Shep, the vice president quoted one serviceman who called the attack on the Pentagon cheap, dirty, and senseless. Mr. Cheney adding himself this morning that it was an event we were meant to take personally, and one he said we did. The vice president and the Secretary of Defense appeared choked up this morning at a ceremony recalling that infamous day. Secretary Rumsfeld saying the events drew us into a war not of our own making, one he said we must prepare ourselves to continue fighting.
Americans have shown throughout our history that we can meet any challenge if we have the will to persevere, and if we understand with clarity exactly what would be at risk were we to fail.
Just before dawn, the Pentagon had a lights ceremony to commemorate the lives of the victims here, 184 beams of light illuminating the sky. Later, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs called this a day of remembrance and one of recommitment. General Pace promising that the military will protect this nation.
We have one very simple message for our terrorists. Those who would seek to prevent this kind of a gathering, those who seek to change our way of life. And that simple message is this: not on our watch.
And Shep, those beams of light are about to come back on. We are told by the Pentagon they will remain on all night through tomorrow morning as this day of sorrow comes to a close. Shep.
Megan Kendall live for us at the Pentagon. Now in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, a chain-link fence has become a temporary tribute to the lives lost on United Flight 93. Photographs and children's drawings and little stuffed animals stand tribute to the 40 innocent lives lost there. And today, as a chilly rain fell, hundreds of mourners marked the moment when the passengers of United 93 fought back and their jet slammed into a field. President Bush visiting the sites of all three attacks and vowing never to forget them. About 2 hours from now, he will address the nation, just as he did 5 years ago this night. The White House tells us it will not be a political speech. So what do we expect to hear from the president? Brett Baer is our chief White House correspondent and live for us there now. Brett?
Shep, senior aides say the president, in a 17-minute speech from the Oval Office tonight, will call for unity and setting aside differences to fight a determined enemy that wants to strike us again. Among others, the White House released this quote: "We face an enemy determined to bring death and suffering into our homes. America did not ask for this war, and every American wishes it were over. So do I. But the war is not over, and it will not be over until either we or the extremists emerge victorious." Aides say the president will also talk about what has become the divisive war in Iraq. saying why we're there and why it's important. Now, the President and the First Lady, as you mentioned, began this 9/11 anniversary a mile and a half from Ground Zero in Lower Manhattan, a solemn ceremony at the Fort Pitt Firehouse, surrounded there by first responders. The first couple then flew to Shanksville, Pennsylvania for a wreath-laying ceremony at the site where United Airlines Flight 93 crashed, spending time with victims' family members, speaking privately there about the courageous actions of those on the flight who fought the hijackers. And for the first time since the first anniversary of the attacks, the President and the First Lady visited all 3 attack sites, finishing the day at the Pentagon with a wreath-laying ceremony there and more emotional moments with more victims' family members. Tonight, aides say the President will call for America to set aside differences to, quote, meet the test that history has given us. Shep.
Brett Baer live tonight at the Pentagon, and you can see the President's speech on many of your local Fox stations and here on Fox News Channel at 9 o'clock Eastern Time, 6 Pacific. A 9/11 message from one of the world's most wanted terrorists. Arabic television today airing a new video from Al-Qaeda's second-in-command, Ayman al-Zawahiri. In that tape, Osama bin Laden's deputy says we should not waste our time on Iraq and Afghanistan because our troops there are, quote, doomed. He also warns Al-Qaeda plans to attack Israel and Western forces in the Persian Gulf. A U.S. counterterrorism official calls it part of an Al-Qaeda media blitz. Less than 1 month after the attacks of 9/11, the United States began bombing Afghanistan in a campaign aimed at Osama bin Laden and his Taliban supporters. Now, 5 years later, much has changed there. A new government and new hope, at least for a while for many. But a recent surge in violence is taking an enormous toll on daily life in Afghanistan. Today, a bomber attacked the funeral of a principal governor in Afghanistan. 6 people killed, dozens of others wounded. The governor himself and 2 other people were killed on Sunday in an attack near his office. Meantime, in Kabul, some of the more than 18,000 United States troops in Afghanistan marked 5 years since the attacks of 9/11. The American flag at half-staff there as the national anthem played and soldiers saluted.
Coming up.
Special delivery in outer space, the shuttle doing some tricky maneuvering as it hooks up with the International Space Station. Fox reports live from Mission Control. Hurricane Florence doing a number on Bermuda, but not as bad as many had feared, and now it's headed north, and now it has company. We're on Storm Track coming up. And she went on vacation and never came back. The FBI looking for the latest passenger to vanish from a cruise ship. From Fox News at Ground Zero and Fox News teams around the world, this is America's newscast. No pundits. No discussion, just the news. More from 9/11 5 years later in a moment, but first, lots of action today. First, the Atlantis astronauts. The shuttle arrived early this morning at the International Space Station, but that was only the beginning. The crew working to upload or unload a new 17-ton addition for the orbiting laboratory and taking pictures of the shuttle's belly. Kim McIntyre with the news. She's live at Johnson Space Center in Houston. Hey, Kim.
Hi, Shep. Pretty amazing pictures they are. The flip maneuver started just after the loss of Columbia. NASA does it to check the shuttle's underbelly and protective heat shield for any imperfections. So far, the photos show no dings or dents, just a couple of gap fillers that are out of place. The pitch maneuver was first started in 2005. Those images found a protruding gap filler on Discovery. It was removed before landing, and the results proved so worthwhile that the pitch maneuver is now protocol on each flight. The shuttle's heat shield is as thin as the cover of an M&M candy. NASA may decide to do a more focused inspection later this week.
We're not seeing new problems. The problems we're seeing we've handled before. We know how to handle them. And however the data turns out is how the data turns out. We'll go deal with it. We pulled a gap filler. We've done all that kind of stuff.
Docking the shuttle is also another tricky maneuver, but mission managers say Commander Brent Jett performed it perfectly. The crew of Atlantis greeted the space station astronauts for a brief moment before they all had to return to work. The teams took a large addition for the space station from the shuttle's payload bay. The 45-foot truss that houses solar panels will dangle from the station's robotic arm overnight. The astronauts will latch the truss into the space station during their first spacewalk tomorrow, and that spacewalk will take place at 5 a.m. tomorrow morning. We'll bring it to you.
Or it's scheduled to. Kim McIntyre live in Houston, and we're also tracking a hurricane as Fox reports live tonight. Category 1 Florence is now. It hit Bermuda earlier today, sort of a glancing blow. Maximum sustained winds then close to 90 miles an hour. The storm knocked out power to more than 20,000 homes and businesses, but Bermuda, as I mentioned, was spared a direct hit. No injuries were reported. Florence expected to move away from the United States coast and cause none of us any problems, but the National Hurricane Center is now announcing that Tropical Storm Gordon has formed in the Atlantic and could be heading toward Bermuda. Federal investigators casting a curious glance at Hewlett-Packard, and that glance tops your Monday Biz Brief. HP says in a Securities and Exchange Commission filing that the United States Attorney's Office has informally contacted the company. The feds and the state of California are looking into HP's possible illegal investigation of company media leaks. The Hewlett-Packard board is considering the fate of the chairwoman there, Patricia Dunn, who ordered that now questionable investigation. The continuing slump in oil prices giving Wall Street a bit of a lift in late session trading today. Stocks bounced back from the last week's declines. Also helping was a comment from the president of the Federal Bank in St. Louis. A man named William Poole telling reporters, quote, "The economy is not fragile, it is robust." That helped things on the corner of Wall and Broad, which saw the Dow up almost 5 points to close at 11,397. The NASDAQ up as well, about 7 here, 7.5 to close at 2173. 5 years after the towers collapsed, the plans for rebuilding are now being finalized as America looks back tonight, looking forward. The United States Air Force major who went missing in Central Asia, what she says about where she was. And some tough reality for a reality television star. More from Ground Zero in just a moment, but first, a woman from Ohio has vanished during a 4-day cruise across the Caribbean Sea. Carnival Cruise Lines now reports the 37-year-old woman went missing on Saturday night, but that her family did not report the disappearance until today, when the ship returned to Miami. The FBI says it does not look as if there's foul play here. The woman's name has not yet been released. Police in Kyrgyzstan are now saying that the Air Force major who reappeared in mysterious circumstances after a 3-day disappearance sounds confused about where she was. She is 33-year-old Jill Metzger, who showed up on Friday 15 miles outside the capital there where she vanished. Investigators now say she told them that an object with a note saying it was a bomb was dropped in her pocket. Then she says she was kidnapped. Police there say her testimony is, well, not very believable. They also say the woman refused further statements after consulting with the United States Embassy. Tragedy for Anna Nicole Smith, no relation, just days after she gave birth to her healthy baby girl. Her 20-year-old son found dead in the Bahamas. The Associated Press is now quoting police as saying that Daniel Smith died on Sunday while visiting his mother in the hospital where she'd just given birth. The cause is not yet known, but Anna Nicole's website says her son died suddenly and that drugs and alcohol were not a factor. A diesel spill in Ohio and a funeral for a trooper in New York as Fox reports across America. Ohio, a tanker hauling diesel fuel overturning in Licking County. The Highway Patrol says about 1,500 gallons of diesel spilled in the wreck. The truck driver killed. Police still investigating to find out how it happened. California, the terminal at Long Beach Airport closed for about 2 hours after a suspicious package was found in a rental car. The bomb squad blew it up just to be safe, but it didn't contain any explosives after all. Incoming flights were not affected, but several departing flights were delayed. Virginia, students at Randolph-Macon Women's College in Lynchburg protesting the trustees' decision to admit men starting next year. The school has been women only for the past 115 years. As with other women's colleges in recent years, the board decided co-education is the only way to survive. New York. Hundreds of police officers joining the family of the state trooper shot and killed during the search for the fugitive Ralph Bucky Phillips. The funeral taking place in Saratoga Springs. 32-year-old Joseph Longobardo was shot in an ambush. He was a former U.S. Marine and Air National Guardsman. Phillips was taken into custody on Friday. And that's a Fox Watch. Across America, there is word of some possible movement now in the nuclear standoff with Iran, and Condoleezza Rice now on exactly what it would take for Washington to join in on the negotiations. 5 years after the attacks of 9/11, the scar in the earth remains unhealed and exposed. Tonight, Eric Lilligren with an update on plans for rebuilding and renewal. And unedited, unscripted, our coverage of 9/11 as it happened tonight in depth. 5 years ago today, as Fox reports live tonight from Ground Zero. 5 years ago today, the sense of loss here in Lower Manhattan was truly overwhelming, and in many ways tonight, it still is. That empty space behind me serves as a constant and unending reminder for people here. But plans are well underway to fill the physical void. In a Fox report from Eric Lilligren.
5 years and more than 5,000 submissions later, a finalized plan for a 9/11 memorial where the World Trade Center stood.
It's called Reflecting Absence, and it's basically two acre-sized pools that are voids that represent the Twin Towers that stood at Ground Zero.
Half of the 16-acre original site is dedicated to the $500 million project. More than 400 trees will stand on the plaza, with places for quiet consideration, and a museum displaying the evidence of a day that all of America will always remember.
Everything from the emergency vehicles that were damaged to artifacts of steel to real keepsakes of the people who died. And it's that juxtaposition of telling the story with the chance to contemplate the loss that we think will deliver the most powerful emotional experience.
Emotions amidst a commercial component aimed at getting back to business. 7 World Trade Center has been rebuilt and reopened in May, and the rest of the building site will host a state-of-the-art transit hub and a massive new office complex, including the Freedom Tower.
This is the Freedom Tower, 1,776 feet.
And 3 others just unveiled approaching this anniversary.
They are done in a way that respects the master site plan, that reflects the need to have as the centerpiece the memorial where we will honor the memory of the heroes of September 11th.
Still in the works are performing arts and visitor centers, as well as a 5th tower to be built just off the 16-acre site. The memorial is scheduled to open 3 years from today. Developers say all the rebuilding should be complete by 2012. In New York, Eric Lilligren, Fox News.
From America's leading news network, you're on the Fox Report. It's the bottom of the hour. Time for the top of the news. 4 moments of silence and 2,700 plus names. That was just part of the ceremony here at Ground Zero 5 years after the attacks of 9/11. There were also tears and tributes at the Pentagon and in Shanksville, PA, where United Flight 93 crashed after passengers are said to have fought back against the hijackers. President Bush took part in ceremonies at all 3 sites. Tonight, he plans to speak to the nation as he did 5 years ago tonight. You can see that speech live here at 9 Eastern, 6 Pacific on Fox News Channel. And Osama's right-hand man also marking the day with another videotape. Ayman al-Zawahiri threatening new attacks on Israel and America's allies in the Persian Gulf. Jennifer Griffin with the news. She's live tonight in Jerusalem. Jennifer.
Shep, Zawahiri's mention of a possible attack in the Gulf region suggests that Al-Qaeda's next target might be oil, a suggestion that they may be attempting to cripple the world economy. Zawahiri, who is bin Laden's number 2, also said that UN forces in Lebanon are enemies of Islam and said the biggest problem with the UN ceasefire resolution was that it recognized Israel. He said any attack on Jews is justified. Al-Qaeda has never carried out any successful attack in inside Israel, but Israeli and Palestinian officials have warned of Al-Qaeda copycat groups emerging in the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, in Lebanon, British Prime Minister Tony Blair offered $75 million to rebuild Lebanon, largely viewed as a lame duck after announcing in recent days that he would step down within a year. Mr. Blair was taunted by this Irish protester for his pro-U.S. stance during the war. 5,000 other Lebanese anti-Blair protesters were kept away. Blair described the announcement in Gaza today of a unity government between Hamas and Fatah as a potentially hugely significant development. The Hamas government elected in January has effectively buckled under the pressure of U.S. and European sanctions. But it's still not clear, Shep, whether the new unity government in the Palestinian areas will in fact recognize Israel. If they don't, they will remain just as cash-strapped and isolated as the last government. Shep?
Jennifer Griffin live this Tuesday morning in Jerusalem. The Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice says Iran must comply with UN demands that it halt uranium enrichment before any negotiations can begin. That comes after reports that the Islamic Republic is considering complying with the demands, at least on a temporary basis. Meantime, today, the head of the UN's nuclear watchdog calling for a compromise from both sides. Mohammed al-Baradei warning the standoff is on the brink of escalating. South Korea's top nuclear negotiator says the United States is proposing a meeting on North Korea during the upcoming UN General Assembly. The meeting is set to involve North Korea's neighbors and other regional powers. A meeting like that could put pressure on North Korea as it refuses to rejoin the six-party talks that are aimed at ending its nuclear program. There are also concerns that North Korea may be getting ready to test a nuclear bomb. Scattered violence killing dozens of people around Iraq today. The deadliest attack, a minibus loaded with explosives that blew up near a recruiting center in central Baghdad. The defense ministry says at least 16 people were killed. A car bombing in the east of Baghdad killed 4 others, and gunmen killed at least 9 people in separate attacks as the violence escalates in northern Iraq and in the capital.
Coming up.
Our world changed in a matter of minutes. The calm and the quiet shattered on a gorgeous September morning in New York City, much like this morning. It was again today, 9/11 blue, as we call it here, and tonight, a look back. Our coverage from that moment and that morning as it happened. As Fox reports live tonight from Ground Zero, 5 hours and 5 years since the attacks of 9/11, and tonight, the beams where the Trade Center once stood stretch into the night sky, sunset over the Hudson River. It was a perfect September morning. For those of you who may live in the South or otherwise, September often feels a lot like August. Not here. It was crisp and perfectly blue, and the sky went on forever and ever. It was that kind of morning, even after Labor Day, where you really do want to get up and get out there and do something. And then for me, at least, it came as a quick bulletin on the local news. It felt as if a small plane might have hit the World Trade Center. It had happened before by accident. And then everything changed. A look back at our coverage now, moment by moment, 9/11 as it happened.
Contact with myself. Go to the Trade Center. Yeah, I believe this is happening.
We have a very tragic alert for you right now. An incredible plane crash into the World Trade Center here at the lower tip of Manhattan.
It's believed a 737 has crashed into this speculation at this point, but at least 3 floors taken out, crashed into the side of the building. Joining us right now, one of the producers with Fox Report, Owen Mugen on the scene. Owen, what do you know? What do you see? Where are you?
Yeah, Brian, I'm on the roof of my building, which is about 5 blocks to the south of the World Trade Center. I'm looking right now at the World Trade Center. There's a massive gaping hole on the second tower. It's about 15 stories from the roof. It's just unbelievable to look at.
I seen that jet go right in.
can just see it right now. You can see emergency vehicles tearing the south and the west side highway heading toward the scene. There are tons of people in the streets. There are papers, things fluttering out. I can't see any evidence of what it was that could have crashed. All I can see is just this massive gaping hole with tons of black smoke falling out of the building.
All we can do is stare aghast at these pictures at this point. You are looking at the north building of the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in Manhattan. These are coming to you live now. Debris raining down from 110 floors up. As you can see, this is a clear blue sky day in Manhattan. If this was an accident, it would be a needle in a haystack kind of accident. There was another one. We just saw another one. We just saw another one apparently go. Another plane just flew into the second tower. This has to be deliberate, folks. We just saw on live television as a second plane flew into the second tower of the World Trade Center. Now, given what has been going on around the world, some of the key suspects come to mind: Osama bin Laden. Who knows what? Eric Shawn is with us. Eric, I know you have a lot of sources at the FBI and other agencies like that. What can you tell us?
Well, first, I apologize for being out of breath because I was walking down Fifth Avenue, which is close to our studios, and I heard a jet, perhaps a 737 or a small Airbus, flying low, unusually low over Fifth Avenue, making a right. I'm not going to say, I don't know, I don't have any reports on what type of plane hit the World Trade Center, but people looked up and it made a right toward the building.
It is a tragedy. It is abhorrent. It is disgusting. But
I'm, wondering: are these pilots terrorists themselves? Are there terrorists in the cockpit who are holding guns to a pilot's head? Did they?
I can't imagine.
You can speculate completely about how this happens, because obviously it takes a lot of training and expertise to fly a complicated, sophisticated aircraft, whether it's a Boeing 737 or a smaller Airbus. These are not little Cessnas and little Pipers. So you have to wonder and raise what possibility there is with the type of scenario that was going on in the cockpit.
Our Wendell Goler is at the White House, make that Sarasota. He is traveling with the president. Wendell Goler, what's the reaction from the president?
The president is here promoting a reading initiative on the second day of a two-day trip to Florida. He just finished reading to some children at the Emma Booker Elementary School and was asked about the incident. He said he was aware of it and that he would have something to say about it later.
Let's bring in David Lee Miller, our correspondent. He has an eyewitness with him. David Lee, what can you tell us?
Good morning, John. I'm a few blocks from the World Trade Center right now. As you would expect, all the roadways are pretty much cut off. The only way to get near the buildings is on foot right now. The scene is absolutely a horrific one. You have people streaming out of the area. You've got people literally in tears and shock. People that just work in the nearby buildings that cannot believe what has happened. Still, many of them remember the terrorist attack years ago on the World Trade Center, and for many of them, this is just an ugly reminder of that, although the details of what happened here are not certain. As I was walking downtown in Lower Manhattan, making my way to the World Trade Centers, I stopped to speak to Sylvia Fuentes. She's with me right now. We're a few blocks away from the building. She works in Lower Manhattan. She used to work in the Trade Center, and I'm going to actually hand her the telephone right now, and she's going to describe for us what she saw this morning as she was arriving at work. Sylvia?
I heard a loud rumbling, and when I walked out of the deli onto Fulton Street, I looked up in the air. There was an airplane actually going into the World Trade Center, and flames were coming out, and smoke was just billowing in the air, and tons of people were running down Fulton Street, just running each other over, and I made my way back to my office on Water Street. And when I got upstairs, I looked out my window to see what was going on, and the Second World Trade Center just went into flames, just from 1 minute to the next.
Sylvia, thanks for that eyewitness report. When we saw that second plane slam into the second tower intentionally, quite clearly, you got to believe this is a terrorist attack. Harvey Kushner is on the line with us. He's a frequent guest of ours and a terrorism expert. Harvey, is it too early to speculate about suspects?
One thinks only that this could be the most horrifically planned incident, in the annals of terrorism against the United States. Think about it. I mean, you look outside the Fox studios. Look how clear it is. I mean, how could you miss the trade towers? I mean, not just one, but two planes.
Well, and it brings to mind, everybody hates those metal detectors at airports, and everybody makes passing through them almost a joke these days. But clearly, it seems that something is going to change if you can make this kind of statement and kill as many people as are likely to be dead in this kind of scenario.
Yeah, John, we're talking about terrorism. No matter how this turns out, this is going to be a day that's going to live in infamy, and it's going to cause changes in terms of, if it turns out that terrorism in terms of security like this country has never seen before.
President Bush is about to speak. He's in Florida. That was what was supposed to be a joyous event at an elementary school. Let's listen in.
Today we've had a national tragedy. Two airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act. Terrorism against our nation will not stand. And now, if you join me in a moment of silence. May God bless the victims, their families, and America. Thank you very much.
We are going to be looking at an enormous death toll. 50,000 people work in those two buildings. Rita Cosby is on the phone with us, and Rita, I understand you have a lot of new information.
Yeah, John, I have just been told from a U.S. law enforcement official that they are saying it is evident that this is a terrorist-related attack, and among the key targets, key people that they're looking at is Osama bin Laden. It was just last Friday that the U.S. State Department put out a worldwide caution to American citizens traveling abroad and also to U.S. government facilities, and they said that terrorism knows no limits, whether it's on U.S. soil or outside, so they're certainly looking at that as a possibility. What I'm also hearing from my officials at FAA, at the Federal Aviation Administration, is that they believe the first plane may have been an American Airlines plane, a commercial jet, either a 737 or 757, and that it was a hijacked plane. This is what they believe. They're still trying to get this verified, but they did get some reports that there was an American Airlines plane that was hijacked en route from Boston to Los Angeles this morning, and they're saying that there is a strong possibility that that first plane that crashed into one of the towers, which does appear to be commercial, and looking at the video, they're saying appears to be either a 737 or 757, that apparently might have been the hijacked plane.
Churchill on you. John Fund from the Wall Street Journal is on the phone with us. John, were you in the area when the planes hit?
I was across the street in my office building.
What did you see? What did you hear?
I heard an incredible sonic boom and looked up, and there were already much smoke and flames pouring out of the building. And about 15 minutes later, of course, the second sonic boom, which of course would have been the second tower and the second plane.
What about injuries, John? Well, can you tell us?
The most terrible and heart-rending thing about this is about 15 minutes ago, bodies started dropping from the top floors of the tower closest to the highway. about at least 5 or 6, and it was absolutely terrible. Obviously, they had 2 choices: to be burned in flames or to leap and end it all. It was quite tragic.
Let me bring into the conversation David Asman, my colleague.
Yes, John Scott,
David, what can you tell us?
I just want to give you some late-breaking information. Perhaps one of the things that is of greatest fear is that there is yet another terrorist attack since those 2 plane crashes happened within 20 minutes of each other. Well, all of Manhattan has been sealed off. This is probably unprecedented. Of course, all of this is unprecedented in this dastardly occasion. But Manhattan has been sealed off. The Hudson River bridges and the tunnels have been sealed. Clearly, there is an attempt right now to thwart any further act of terrorism, act of violence against the people of Manhattan. So Manhattan is in a lockdown. We are hearing right now of another explosion that has taken place at the Pentagon. We have the heart of the financial district of America being attacked. Now we understand that there is an explosion. There has been an explosion in the Pentagon, the heart of the military command center of the United States of America, John. It can't get much worse than this. Let's hope.
You got to believe that it has happened again. Another large airliner, perhaps hijacked, perhaps part of some widespread plan, apparently slamming into at least the area around the Pentagon. They have not struck at America. They have struck at some individual places in America. But this country will go on. I want to go to our Washington managing editor, Britt Hume, who has the outlook from the nation's capital. Britt, this raises all kinds of questions about America's response, and I guess that response is not going to be immediate, is it?
Well, whether it is immediate or not, the one thing I think we are seeing, John, is this series of evacuations from various buildings around Washington. And I think it's important to say that we don't know and have no reason to believe that the White House, for example, was facing any immediate or imminent threat. The same is true on Capitol Hill, where it appears they will be evacuating the building up here soon. Nothing has happened at either of those places. This, of course, though, John, I think this is one of these days where we can say that things will not again be the same in the United States of America. This is the kind of terrorist attack that is the nightmare that experts and others have warned about, but some of us may have thought really could not happen on such a scale. This is quite remarkable.
As we watch these pictures, the World Trade Center, 110 stories, literally starting to fall.
I hope I live. It's coming down on me. Here it comes. I'm getting behind a car. I had to go find people who need help, because I don't think I'm one of them. You okay, sir? Okay. Can I just get a toot off your respirator?
We was inside the building. You were inside the World Trade Center? Inside the building.
This United Airlines Flight 93 crashed.
From the size of the impact crater, it would appear as though the angle of descent or angle of attack had to be nearly straight in.
I think the pilot downed the plane in a remote area because, you know, there wasn't very many houses over there where it went down. And I don't know, it's really... The whole thing is just unbelievable.
This is clearly a national catastrophe. There will be some response from the White House. Let's go to Wendell Golder, who was traveling with the president in Sarasota, Florida, and find out what the latest is there. Wendell?
John, the president left Sarasota, Florida. Air Force One took off just a short while ago.